Chapter 574. Since it was an order from the sixth young master, they had to carry it out. This was also the first lesson they learned after becoming the Cold Vanguard, which was to obey orders. The officers retreated. Yang Chendong, who was still looking at the sand table, punched the name of Wood Province. Order: the entire army will rest for a day, then attack Wood Province. Yang Chendong's words carried a hint of killing intent. The tragic scene in Hanoi City's commercial street had provoked him. His dream was to lead all the Han people to the peak of the world. He had just taken a step forward, but he had already suffered such a blow. This made him feel very guilty, and he also planned to vent his anger on Lansong Nation. Peace Town had been broken, and the mercenaries were charging towards Wood Province. After the frontline battle report returned, Fan Yuhai had already sent people to Lansong Land's capital, Wanxiang City, to urge for reinforcements. He even said that if reinforcements did not appear, he would retreat. He had originally come to help Lansong Nation, but now that the main character had not appeared, what was the meaning of him, the helper, staying here? Fan Yuhai's heart desired to defeat the mercenaries. In order to achieve this goal, he had made a lot of preparations this time. However, this did not stop him from scaring Lansong Nation. After all, the mercenaries were now in Lansong Nation's territory. By the time Fan Yuhai's men arrived at Wanxiang City, Sang Wenla had already led 100,000 soldiers out of the city. Since the king had already given the order, he naturally did not dare to delay. However, the required rations had not been gathered, and he could not possibly let the soldiers go to the battlefield on an empty stomach. Wasn't this? He had just finished preparing the military supplies when he led the army out. However, he did not know how terrible the rations that he had spent so much effort to obtain were. The rice was old, and it was the kind that had already started to rot and mold. The weapons were semi-finished products. They only looked in good shape, but when they were actually used, one would know how weak they were. Even the quality of the uniforms they wore was extremely poor. Some of them had already been unstitched before they even reached Sangwon City, causing countless soldiers to curse them. All of this was naturally the work of State Preceptor Long Qi. He had already accepted Skylark's 2 million taels of silver. After making the decision to rely on the Duke of Loyalty, he no longer feared anyone. Moreover, in his eyes, since these 100,000 soldiers had left, there was no need for them to think about coming back. What was there to be afraid of? Half a month later, in front of Sangnu City, the armies of both sides set up their battle formations, looking like they were going to fight it out. The attacking party consisted of more than 40,000 mercenaries. They left Hanoi, passed through Ing Brothel, took over Heping Town, and took over Muzhou City. They came all the way to Sangnu City. From afar, the defending side seemed to have the advantage in numbers. Sang Wenla led 100,000 troops, and with Fan Yuhai's 50,000, they had a total of 150,000 men. This did not include the 100,000 workers and 30,000 Han civilians that they had recruited from the nearby cities. The Lansong Kingdom once had an alias called the Laos Comfort Department. It was originally a province of the Great Ming Dynasty. However, because the Great Ming Dynasty had lost its rule over Jiaoji, and the originally powerful Great Ming Dynasty had split into two after the Tumu Rebellion, Jiaoji was naturally no longer under the Great Ming Dynasty's control. However, there were still some Han civilians within the Great Ming Dynasty. It was as if these 30,000 people were forcibly recruited from the nearby cities. Now half of these Han civilians were pushed to the front of the battlefield. The remaining half were mixed in with the Lansong soldiers and Fan Yuhai's men. This was to prevent the mercenaries from firing cannons. Fan Yuhai had already experienced how advanced their cannons were during the Battle of Hanoi City. With that experience, he was fully prepared this time. The 30,000 Han civilians mixed in with the army were prepared to deal with the cannons. There were also 100,000 Lansong civilians. They had set up hundreds of catapults. In comparison, these catapults were very simple. Some were even built with rough wood, and the joints were connected with thick ropes. They could not be used for long, but when there were many of them, they were still quite powerful. This was the second method that Fan Yuhai had prepared. Since it was the second method, there should be a third. That's right, the third method was the 5,000 light cavalry. This was all that Fan Yuhai had. He had even taken out the 1,000,000 taels of silver that Baiming had given him. Only then could he have such a cavalry force that could charge and retreat quickly. Before the Ming Dynasty, the Mongols relied on their invincible war horses to kill their way into the Central Plains and establish the Yuan Dynasty. From this, one could see how strong cavalry was. Other than these three methods, Fan Yuhai had another trump card, which was Li Min and Shin Kuan. They were all experts in close combat and possessed decent martial arts. As long as they found the right opportunity, they would be able to sever the head of the Duke of Loyalty amidst the chaos. If they succeeded, the mercenaries would be defeated without a leader. At that time, he would lead his army and fight his way through, restoring the glory of Jiaoji and reliving the glory of the past. For this battle, Fan Yuhai had put in a lot of effort and made ample preparations. Right now he was riding on a horse and mixed in with the cavalry. If he made him unhappy, his position as commander would be over. The four commanders were waiting for Yang Qindong's instructions. The command center was extremely quiet, until Beta Persei shouted, "Not good, the enemy is moving, and they are slowly walking towards us." "What?" Luo Pe and the others exclaimed, and each of them looked at the battlefield through the binoculars on their chests. Yang Qindong also took the binoculars from Beta Persei and saw the enemy encircling the Han civilians and approaching the center of the battlefield step by step. The look in his eyes became even more gloomy, and the command center was so silent that you could hear a pin drop. After a long time, he finally spat out a word with difficulty, "Retreat." "What?" Wu Sheng's reaction was the most intense, as if he could not believe his ears. How could such a military order be given? "I said retreat, everyone retreat." Yang Qindong was like an angry lion, and he roared at Wu Sheng. This time everyone heard it clearly, and their bodies tensed up, and they immediately carried out their mission. Yang Qindong was left alone in his chair. He knew that these Han civilians were not real Han civilians, and they had lived in the Lansong Kingdom for many years, and they had already gotten married or had children there. In their hearts, they had probably long forgotten about the great Ming Dynasty. If these people died, then they died, and it was not considered a loss. However, in front of so many people, Yang Qindong had no choice but to give such a military order. This was because he wanted to establish a side in the army that loved his people like his own children. He wanted everyone to know that his goal of leading all Han people to the top of the world had not changed. "Young master." Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei walked to Yang Qindong's left and right. The two of them did not know what to say at this moment, and only thought that they should accompany the young master at this time. "I'm fine, you guys pack up and retreat." Yang Qindong seemed to be very weak as he waved his hand. However, in reality, the look in his eyes was extremely firm. He had already thought of a plan to deal with this situation, and what he did just now was more of an act. In fact, as early as a few days ago, Yang's information was sent over. Among them was the news that the nearby Han civilians were suddenly recruited. The moment he saw this news, Yang Qindong guessed in his mind what Fan Yuhai was going to do. Chapter 575. Using civilians as hostages. Perhaps the ancient people did not experience this many times. However, during the anti-Japanese era, this kind of thing happened countless times. However, this seemingly old-fashioned method was the most effective against those benevolent and righteous people. On this issue, their seniors had suffered many losses. When they were studying in the military academy, the instructors had also brought up this problem. It was a pity that even in the future, when technology was more advanced, no one could think of a good way to solve this problem. Fortunately, the students back then knew the nobility of human rights. No matter who it was, if they wanted to use this method again, they would first have to endure great pressure. They did not think that they would encounter such a situation again. At that time, Yang Qindong had also thought of this problem, but it was just a thought. After that, he threw it to the back of his mind. After all, he also did not think that such a thing would happen to him. He was the most powerful cold vanguard, the king of soldiers. He was used to carry out dangerous missions, and not in this kind of conventional battle. The most hateful thing was that he actually had to face this problem now. For the past few days, Yang Qindong had been thinking about it. Until last night, when he looked at the moon hanging high in the sky and the bright moonlight shone down on the earth, he finally made a decision. Although it was not the best method, at least it was passable and no one would criticize him. Yang Chendong gave the order to retreat. The 40,000-strong army retreated for tens of li. When the sky was about to turn dark, Fan Yuhai's army finally stopped advancing. Then everyone's face was filled with joy as they laughed heartily. They thought that they had finally found the soft rope of the mercenaries. If they had known that this method would be so effective, they would not have lost Jiaoji. Following the laughter, the 30,000 Han people were speechless and angry. Originally, they did not know what they were going to do here. However, after everything that happened today, they finally saw the truth. It turned out that they were going to be used as human shields. The anger in their hearts was as fierce as a tiger. No. It could only be said that they were like cats. In front of Fan Yuhai and the Landsong Kingdom's army, who were many times more numerous than them, they did not dare to resist. All these years of living here had smoothed out the edges and corners of their struggles, making them accustomed to being oppressed and resigned to their fate. Of course, they were more worried that the Han army would suddenly launch an attack on them. If that was the case, the 10,000 Han soldiers at the front would undoubtedly be the first to be killed. Just like that, they were on tenterhooks for an entire day. Only when the sky had completely darkened did the Han citizens let out a sigh of relief. Although they did not know what would happen the next day, no matter what, they had managed to get through today's ordeal. Haha, as expected, these Han people are mercenaries. In the central tent, Sangwang Le's face was full of excitement. He sat on the big chair and drank wine. He felt incomparably carefree. Fan Yuhai was also very happy. Obviously, the feeling of having everything under control made him very comfortable. However, he was still a famous general, so he wouldn't easily show his arrogant side. Wasn't the mercenary army still there? To become a famous general, there were several requirements. For example, accurate judgment, fearless courage, the ability to control the entire situation, as well as a humble and cautious mentality. Fan Yuhai was undoubtedly qualified, but his years of cautiousness still made him say to Sangwang La, "General Sang, it's too early to be happy. The mercenaries are only retreating, they have not been defeated by us." Looking at these mercenaries, their military discipline is indeed strict. Even when they were retreating, they were still in an orderly manner. They will not be easy to deal with. As for the 30,000 Vietnamese mercenaries, their morale is already starting to weaken. Why don't we attack them when we advance tomorrow? As long as these 30,000 people are defeated, it will definitely affect the main force of the mercenaries. At that time, our opportunity will be presented. Everything that happened today had already proven Fan Yuhai's ability. Sangwang La naturally believed in his words. He nodded. Okay, tomorrow morning we will plan properly. It's about time we take the initiative to attack. Previously, they did not attack because they were not sure if the Han citizens would be effective against the mercenaries. After all, this was an opponent that killed without batting an eyelid. Just the number of Jingguan statues that they had created was unknown. But now that they had found their weakness, how could they not take advantage of it? Good. Tomorrow we will definitely defeat the mercenaries. Haha, let's drink. Fan Yuhai was in a good mood as he raised his wine glass high towards his ally. Cheers. Sangwang La laughed loudly, showing the arrogant side of him when it came to drinking. The cold front had a strict discipline. During wartime, regardless of the reason, no one was allowed to drink. Because of this, they had even punished a few low-ranking officers. Those who were able to enter the cold front were all outstanding individuals. To become an officer, one had to put in a lot of effort and go through a lot of trials. Their family was extremely proud of having an officer in the cold front. But it was precisely because of drinking that they were taken away that they were wrongly accused. With such an example, even those who loved to drink could only suppress their desire for good food. There was no other choice. The treatment of the cold front was too good, and the halo that it gave off was too strong. No one was willing to voluntarily withdraw from such a team. At this moment, not only was no one in the cold front drinking, they were all sitting quietly. A strong sense of pressure was building up above their heads. For the first time, The incident during the day made them feel helpless. Facing their own compatriots, some of them even felt hatred in their hearts. Perhaps it was because their daily political work was too good, but the word surrender did not exist in the dictionary of the cold front soldiers. Even if they were the only ones left on the battlefield, they would still fight fiercely to show their existence. After all, if they became martyrs, their families would be respected and treated well. If they became captives, their families would not be able to raise their heads with them for the rest of their lives. Under this kind of ideological education, they looked down on those who were spineless, even if they were Han citizens. Just like the 10,000 Han citizens who walked in front of the enemy during the day. Although they were forced to do so and had their own difficulties, it was not a reason for them to help the enemy do evil. Could it be that if the mercenaries and the cold front were defeated, these Han citizens would be considered meritorious? Would they be able to live a good life? The answer was obviously not like that. If the mercenaries were defeated, these Han citizens would no longer have any value. Although they would not be killed immediately, they would not be able to live a good life. Furthermore, because the mercenaries had injured many of the Lansang Kingdom soldiers, they would only vent their anger on these Han citizens. In other words, from the moment the mercenaries appeared on the land of the Lansang Kingdom, these Han people only had two choices. One was to live in grievance, the other was to bravely stand up and resist. Perhaps they would die, but perhaps they would be able to completely change the trajectory of their lives. This principle could be seen by all the cold front soldiers, but these Han citizens did not seem to be able to see it. Perhaps it was because they were uneducated and did not know how to think, or perhaps they did not know what resistance was. They did not know how to rely on their own efforts to earn the respect of others, to obtain their own dignity. Or perhaps, they did not even want to consider and face this problem. If that was the case, what was the difference between these people being alive and dead? For the sake of these people, they had no choice but to retreat. Who would feel good about it? If not for the strict discipline of the cold front soldiers, where obeying orders was the first thing they learned after joining the army, they would not have retreated step by step and revealed a trace of helplessness. However, the orders came from the sixth young master, so naturally, they could only obey. The cold front soldiers and the 20 auxiliary battalions ate dinner in such an atmosphere. After that, no one said a word, silently hugging their rifles and returning to their own barracks. The sky was already dark, but not a single soldier said that they were going to sleep. Under the suffocating state of mind, they probably would not be able to sleep even if they were asked to. Who knew if they would have nightmares when they finally fell asleep? No, we can't allow others to bully us like this. We must resist. Among the auxiliary soldiers, a company commander called Wang Yong suddenly broke the silence and stood up. Wang Yong's personality was straightforward. In order to avenge his family, he did not hesitate to enter the cold front soldiers' barracks under the guise of herding pigs, and caused a huge ruckus. Fortunately, he was lucky enough to meet the sixth young master, Yang Chendong. After that, not only did he kill his enemy, Cheng Yuan, from the Huang bandit army, he was also assigned as a temporary auxiliary soldier. After experiencing more than a dozen battles, Wang Yong finally matured. Not only did he become an auxiliary soldier, but he also became a company commander of the auxiliary soldiers. With his personality, it was normal for him to suddenly stand up and express his unfairness at this time. Originally, everyone was very depressed. All they lacked was a fuse to ignite their emotions. Wang Yong's sudden appearance gave everyone an outlet to vent their emotions. Very quickly he received the support of many officers. Everyone was holding a breath in their hearts, but they did not know what to do. Since someone said that it was unfair, and wanted to ask the sixth young master for help, many officers stood up. At first, it was only Wang Yong's battalion. Soon, this atmosphere spread to the other battalions, and they received even more support. In the end, even the cold front soldiers joined in. Commander Wu Sheng became the leader of the crowd. He brought more than 50 officers of platoon rank and above to the temporary command center. What are you all doing? Looking at the sudden appearance of so many officers in such a menacing manner, the first and second guards in charge of the arrangements became 100 times more alert. Some of the guards even unlocked the safety of their guns. as if they were ready to fire at any moment. Chapter 576. The captain of the first guard team, Qiu Vi, and the captain of the second guard team, Dao Xiao, were also holding their guns. Their eyes were filled with anger, especially when they looked at Wu Sheng, the leader of these officers. Their eyes were filled with murderous intent. Obviously, they thought that this was a mutiny and that Wu Sheng was the leader. Wu Sheng's face turned bitter when he noticed the two guard captains' murderous gazes. He would not dare to harm the sixth young master, even if he had 100 guts. He was here to ask for a battle. In order to avoid any misunderstandings, he and the other officers did not bring any weapons. Captains, you've misunderstood. We're here to request a battle. We're not here to harm the sixth young master. We don't have the guts to do that. In order to clear up the misunderstanding, Wu Sheng nervously explained. Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao did not listen to Wu Sheng's explanation. They only knew that these people had come to the sixth young master's tent without orders, and had threatened the safety of the tent. They had to deal with these people according to their duties. Men, tie these people up. Once the two captains gave the order, 60 guards ran out from all corners and pounced on the 50-plus officers like ferocious tigers. These guards did not care what they were here for. Since their captains had given the order, they did not hold back. They used all their strength and pressed the officers who had come to ask for a battle to the ground. However, the officers didn't dare to resist. If they did, it would be no different from a rebellion. But the problem was who dared to rebel against Yang Qindong. Soon, the 50 officers were restrained. Their hands were tied behind their backs and pressed to the ground. Some of the officers had to pay a price for this. For example, their mouths came into close contact with the ground, and they were already eating dirt. Wu Sheng was also held down. Perhaps because he was the captain and a fierce general, the number of people holding him down increased from 1 to 2. With the 8 captains, Jiang Yupeng, controlling him, he could not resist at all. We can't accept what you're doing. We want to see the sixth young master. Although he was restrained, his mouth wasn't sealed. Wu Sheng was still shouting and yelling. He was now the leader of Cold Front, and he was definitely one of the higher-ups of Cold Front. But now he was actually being pressed to the ground and eating dirt. How could he be willing? Hearing Wu Sheng shout, the other officers also shouted, looking like they would rather be beaten to death. Seal their mouths. Chou Wu said with a black face when he saw that he couldn't calm them down. He looked like he was about to sew Wu Sheng's and the others' mouths with a needle. Once the order was given, some members immediately went to find towels and other things to stuff their mouths with. This caused the officers to struggle even more. If they were really gagged, then wouldn't they really become rebellious officers who couldn't speak reason? What? Seeing that the situation was about to change if the officers resisted, the guards were about to be ruthless. Just as they were about to get injured, a voice shouted. Tiger's Mane, a senior colonel, appeared. There were only 3 senior colonels in the entire Yangxia army. They were the army's division commander, Lung Song, and the navy's division commander, Gao Xiong. The last one was Tiger's Mane. This also showed his lofty status and identity. As soon as Tiger's Mane appeared, 2 guard captains immediately walked up and said, Tiger's Mane, these officers came without orders. There are so many of them. We were afraid that there would be problems, so we took the initiative. No. We didn't even bring a single weapon. How could we have other thoughts? We just want to see the sixth young master. We want to fight. Wu Sheng, who was pinned down, forced his head up and looked at Tiger's Mane. At the same time, he looked at Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu with a warning gaze. It was as if he was saying, Brats, I'll remember you. Just wait and see how I'll deal with you later. Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu naturally didn't care about the threat in Wu Sheng's eyes. They were the sixth young master's guards. They already had a high status. Even if Lung Song and Gao Xiong were here, they didn't have the right to order them around. Enough. Tiger's Mane saw everything. His body shook and he shouted angrily, We're all brothers. Why are you using weapons? Let them go. Let them go? Tiger's Mane, there are more than 50 of them. Once. The second guard captain, Dao Xiao, said unwillingly. Once what? Or do you have no confidence in yourselves? Even 60 people with guns can't deal with 50 people? Listen to my order. Let them go. The sixth young master wants to see them. Tiger's Mane's eyes flashed coldly as he looked at Dao Xiao. Once he heard that it was the sixth young master's order, Dao Xiao immediately became obedient. After he agreed, he gave the order to let them go. Wu Sheng and the rest of the 50 guards were freed. Wu Sheng stood up. He first shook off the dirt on his body. Then he saluted Tiger's Mane and said, "Thank you for your help, Tiger's Mane. There's no need to thank me. This is the sixth young master's idea. But I also want to remind you that when you see the sixth young master, you only need to express your opinion and attitude. Don't make a fuss. Otherwise, before anyone else can deal with you, I'll make the first move." Tiger's Mane's words were not just for show. Everyone knew that he had been serving the sixth young master for many years, and was regarded as the most trusted person. If they offended him, Wu Sheng and the rest would not be able to withstand his suppression. It wouldn't even be long before their military officer halos would be removed. Knowing that he could not go against Tiger's Mane, Wu Sheng nodded repeatedly. "Don't worry, Tiger's Mane. We know what we're doing." Although he said that, whether he knew what he was doing or not was quickly seen. When Wu Sheng and the rest of the 50 guards entered the command center, they became enraged again. One by one they asked to fight. Some even said that if they couldn't fight, they might as well be demoted. This was because they couldn't lead the soldiers under them. It would be better to be an ordinary soldier. The shouting continued for a while. Tiger's Mane scolded them several times, but there was no effect at all. The guards all talked at once and had no intention of stopping. Yang Chendong sat in his chair and watched Wu Sheng and the others' performance very calmly. He did not speak at all. It wasn't until the time it took for a stick of incense to burn past, and the guards were all talking, that he coughed softly. Beta Persei, who was standing at the side, immediately understood and shouted, "Shut up, all of you. The young master has something to say." A voice like a lion's roar resounded throughout the command center, causing everyone's eardrums to tremble. At this time, they finally understood why the sixth young master always told Beta Persei to speak softly. If he didn't suppress it, no one's ears would be able to withstand such a loud voice ringing in their ears every day. But the effect of this roar was also good. At least everyone's mouths were half closed and no one said anything more. The command center quieted down. Yang Chendong's gaze slowly swept across everyone one by one. Anyone who was stared at by his gaze would involuntarily lower their head, like a child who had made a mistake. "You want to ask for battle?" Yang Chendong finally asked the first question after an unknown amount of time. "Yes, sixth young master, we want to ask for battle." Wu Sheng's official position was the highest here, so naturally, he was the one who answered Yang Chendong's question. Yang Chendong wasn't surprised or angry that Wu Sheng stood up for him. Instead, he asked, "Then do you know that the enemy has placed our compatriots in the front line? If we attack, we might hurt them." Wu Sheng nodded. "We know." Wu Sheng answered happily. Obviously, he had already thought about the situation and problems he would face before he came. Thus, not only did he answer without hesitation, he also said the following words very smoothly. "But we also know that if we blindly retreat, it will not only harm our compatriots in front of us, but even our Han compatriots behind us will also be implicated. We can't lose the big picture for the small. Besides, what are you talking about?" Yang Chendong asked with interest when he saw Wu Sheng's hesitant look. "Besides." As if he had gathered his courage, Wu Sheng said with a resolute expression, "Besides, they are now being threatened by the enemy and have no intention of resisting. Then they are not our compatriots, but the enemy's accomplices. Facing such people, we can't be soft-hearted." "Nonsense." Yang Chendong's originally amiable face suddenly turned cold, stopping Wu Sheng from saying what he wanted to say next. "Sixth young master." Wu Sheng wanted to continue speaking, but Tiger's Mane, who knew Yang Chendong very well, shouted loudly, "Listen to the young master. If you dare to speak nonsense again, I will lock you up." Putting aside the unpleasant feeling of being locked up, just the fact that they were facing a powerful enemy, if they were locked up, wouldn't they miss out on the big battle? Without a battle to fight, that was Wu Sheng's weakness. He quickly shut his mouth, and did not dare to continue speaking. Wu Sheng didn't say anything, but Yang Chendong continued. Just because they were threatened by the enemy doesn't mean that we don't recognize them as our compatriots. In fact, they've suffered a lot over the years. They suffered a lot. The reason why we attacked the Lansong nation was not only to take revenge for provoking us, but also to save more Han people, so that they can live a better life like our family. Don't you think so? Yes, the sixth young master is merciful. For the sake of the Han people, heaven and earth can be our witness. The group of officers said in unison. They weren't trying to flatter him, but they were thinking the same thing from the start. Alright, since everyone agrees with my point of view, let's prepare for the army's retreat after daybreak. If there are no other questions, you can all go back. Yang Chendong waved his hand helplessly as if the matter had been settled. Chapter 577. If it was any other time, Yang Chendong would have said something like this and no one would have any objections. However, when they heard that there was still a retreat, the officers could not accept it. If they continued to retreat like this, when would there be an end? Sixth young master, we can't retreat anymore. If we continue to retreat, we will have to return to Yunnan province. There are more Han people there. Once the war extends there, the losses will be even greater. Yes, we can't retreat anymore, sixth young master. It's not wrong for you to feel sorry for the Han people, but doing so will only allow the enemy to take a mile after taking an inch and hurt more people. We can't retreat, we have no way out. The officers all spoke at once. No matter what they said, there was only one conclusion, and that was that they could not retreat anymore. We really can't retreat anymore, sixth young master. Suddenly, a voice rang out from outside the command center. Following that, 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Pe, Political Commissar Kong Jia, and 3rd Regiment Political Commissar Chen Bo strode into the command center. With such a huge commotion, how could the three of them not know? There was only one reason why they did not appear, and that was because they had the same thoughts as these officers. Since they had the same thoughts, why not let these people cause a ruckus? Perhaps there would be some good results. However, outside the tent, when they heard Yang Chendong say that they would continue to retreat, the three of them could not help but take the initiative to stand out. Another 3 regimental-level officers stood out. Together with Wu Sheng, all 4 regimental-level officers had the same attitude. Obviously, this brought a lot of pressure to Yang Chendong. This could be seen from the fact that he did not speak and was frowning. Yang Chendong did not speak, which meant that he valued the opinions of Luo Pe and the other 2. Since they were not rejected immediately, the 3 of them saw an opportunity and hope. After looking at each other, the political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jia, stepped out and said in a pleading tone, "Sixth young master, we have to fight this war. If we retreat, it will really be like what everyone said. We will only implicate more Han brothers. So counterattack is necessary. And as long as we handle it well, we should be able to reduce the number of casualties." What do you think? Yang Chendong looked at Kong Jia and asked. "Sixth young master, I think that when we start the attack, we can shout the slogan, 'Tell the Han people to get down.' If they do, our bullets will only sweep across them. That way, the possibility of hurting them will be minimized. Isn't that better?" Kong Jia said his idea in one breath. From this point, it could be seen that his idea was not a sudden one, but an answer that he had thought about for a long time. Yang Chendong praised the other party's method in his heart. It seemed that this was the only way. However, on the surface he still looked contemplative and doubtful. If that's the case, our cannons won't be able to exert their advantage. Can we defeat hundreds of thousands of enemies? That's not a problem. I promise that we officers will charge at the front line and set an example to all the soldiers. As long as we charge fiercely and fast enough, and don't give the enemy a chance to counterattack, even without the support of cannons, we can still win the battle. Wu Sheng finally had a chance to speak again. He said excitedly and patted his chest as if he was giving a military order. With Wu Sheng taking the lead, the other officers also followed suit. One by one, they patted their chests and made a promise. At this moment, the morale of the soldiers was high and strong. Yang Chendong also knew that it was time to make a decision. He had been waiting for this moment. Good. Meng suddenly stood up from his chair. Since everyone is so confident, What you said is also very reasonable. Then I order everyone to go down and prepare. After 2 hours, we will launch a fierce attack. But you must remember what you said and do your best to ensure the safety of our fellow Han people. Yes. The 60 officers saluted together. At this moment, they were all extremely excited. This was a battle that they had taken the initiative to ask for. They would definitely give it their all and not let the 6th young master look down on them. However, they did not know that this was all arranged by Yang Chendong. During the day, no one noticed the sudden meeting between Tiger's Mane and Wang Yong. The process was simple. Tiger's Mane used his status to ask Wang Yong for help and mobilized more officers to persuade the 6th young master. As for whether this was Tiger's Mane's request or Yang Chendong's own idea, only the master and servant knew. The petition finally ended with the satisfaction of all the officers. The next step was to prepare for the battle. There were 2 reasons for choosing to fight at night. Firstly, it was because the enemy would not be able to completely control the Han civilians under their control. Secondly, it was because the morale of the troops was at its peak. If they did not make use of this opportunity, it would inevitably be discouraged during the day. This would directly affect their fighting strength. As for how effective it would be to shout slogans to get the Han people to kneel down and cooperate with them, no one could predict. There should be some effect, but it was impossible to not kill a single Han person. The petitioning officers returned to their respective barracks. Then they recounted the scene of their encounter with the 6th young master to everyone with exaggerated details, causing many people to be extremely excited. This was a battle opportunity that they had taken the initiative to ask for. Of course, they had to perform well. Otherwise, not only would they fail to live up to the trust that the 6th young master had placed in them, they would also be punished for it. Even if it was for their own future, they had to perform well this time. The fighting spirit of the officers was roused. Very quickly, the soldiers under them were all riled up. Originally, the retreat during the day had already made them extremely unhappy. Now that they could finally fight back, no one would say anything. They all patted their chests and promised that they would perform well. The mercenaries were already in an uproar. Their fighting spirit soared into the sky. The enemy camp was completely unaware. Late at night, Fan Yuhai and Sang Weng returned to their respective tents to rest after finishing their drinking. They wanted to have a good night's sleep and wait until dawn to see how the mercenaries retreated. Then they would look for an opportunity to attack. The weather at the end of January was still slightly cold. Many Lansong soldiers and former Jiaoji soldiers on night duty curled up and leaned against each other for warmth. They closed their eyes and took a nap. In the darkness, 400 meters away, the mercenaries had already charged back. In comparison, they were all burning with passion. At this moment, they were staring at the enemy under the torches. As soon as the order to attack was given, the entire army would charge out. In order to better complete this mission, the 2 main regiments of the Cold Front and 20 auxiliary battalions were all mobilized. A total of over 10,000 people wielded the 95 style or 81 rifles. They looked like ferocious tigers descending from the mountains. Behind them were 30,000 Vietnamese mercenaries, led by General Hong Jin. They were all waiting for the battle to begin. Pass down the order. Later on, everyone will perform well. Do not fall behind the mercenaries. Chop off the enemy's dog head. Hong Jin was also holding back his anger as he spoke. He could already feel the anger in the 6th young master's heart. When his master was angry, as a dog, he naturally had to take a bite out of the enemy. It was not only to show his ability, but also to show his loyalty. He would definitely not let go of such an opportunity. The hands on the watch moved up and down. When it was 1 a.m., Luo Pe, the regimental commander of the 2nd Regiment, and Wu Sheng, the regimental commander of the 3rd Regiment, stood up almost at the same time and roared, "Charge!" Then, thousands of soldiers and horses started to move at a high speed. More than 40,000 people roared in unison. Their footsteps landed on the ground, causing the earth to tremble at this moment. The moon hanging high in the sky also drilled into the clouds at this moment. It seemed to be afraid, or perhaps it could not bear to see the massacre happen. What's going on? A sudden roar rang out, causing the enemy soldiers 400 meters away to wake up from their daze. However, before they could react, more and more enemies appeared in their line of sight. Following that, thousands of gunshots rang out. The first wave of 500 enemies did not even have the time to dodge. They were shot and killed one by one, turning into corpses. It was only a distance of 400 meters, and the cold front and auxiliary soldiers were sprinting forward. In just a minute, they had killed their way into the enemy's camp. Following the battle cries, another clear voice rang out. All the Hans can be spared if you kneel on the ground. Those who stand will be killed without mercy. The voice rang out again and again, causing the entire camp to be able to hear it. When the 30,000 Han civilians heard this, they first panicked. Then the first smart person took the lead and fell to the ground. Out of instinct, the others followed suit and fell to the ground. Although they didn't know what the result would be, they didn't know what else they could do at this moment. Bastards, how dare they? The Duke of Loyalty and Courage is truly despicable. Fan Yuhai's tent was filled with cries. When he heard the battle cries outside, he knew that something was wrong. His first reaction was that Yang Chendong did not care about the lives of the Hans. Otherwise, why would he have the guts to attack? He said that he wanted to save the Hans, but that was just a slogan to show his benevolence. Otherwise, why would he have the courage to start a war? Fan Yuhai kept talking about other people's faults. He didn't even think about it. Was his way of doing things open and above board? In a battle between two armies, he did not think about how to defeat the enemy head-on. Instead, he thought about using despicable methods. He was no longer worthy of being called a famous general. Chapter 578. Quick, gather the cavalry and prepare to retreat. Oh right, inform Li Min and Shen Kuan to make their move. After venting his frustrations, Fan Yuhai quickly regained his composure and gave out orders. The attack of the mercenaries was too sudden, to the point that he did not have the time to prepare properly. Based on his intuition, the outcome of this battle was already decided. Since they were going to lose, then the most important thing was to preserve their strength. The other troops could be abandoned, but the 5,000 cavalrymen could not be left here. With the speed of their war horses, they could definitely retreat safely. Under Fan Yuhai's orders, the 5,000 cavalrymen quickly gathered and protected Fan Yuhai as they left the camp. They did not even turn back to Sangnu City, but turned and fled in another direction. It was obvious that he knew his place. He knew that a single city would not be able to stop the powerful mercenaries. At the moment when he led the cavalrymen to retreat, over 100 figures headed in the opposite direction. The leaders were Li Min and Shen Kuan. They had a more important mission to complete. Compared to Fan Yuhai's decisiveness, Sang Wang Le's reaction was slower. When he was woken up from his sleep and was told that the mercenaries were coming, he did not escape immediately. Instead, he ordered his men to launch a counterattack. At the same time, he arranged for the captive Han people to be brought over. He wanted to kill the Han people in front of the mercenaries, to kill until the other party was terrified and had no choice but to retreat. It was a beautiful dream, but reality was a blow to people. Sang Wenla had forgotten how strong the enemy was, and how he had successfully infuriated the other party when he forced them to retreat earlier in the day. Once the order was given, how likely was it to be executed? The second and third cold vanguard was like a ferocious tiger, stabbing into the heart of the enemy like a pair of sharp blades. After facing a little resistance, they managed to rescue 4 groups of Han people, each group having about 1,000 Han people. These captive Han people were like livestock, their movements fixed by a few wooden stakes. Even when the cold vanguard arrived, they did not dare to break through the stakes. Just from this point, they were a bunch of zombies without any fighting spirit. Fortunately, not only were these people obedient to the enemy, they were also obedient to the mercenaries. When the slogans were heard, each and every one of them lay on the ground, trembling. It was as if they wouldn't get up even if they were beaten to death. This allowed them to dodge the bullets flying in all directions, ensuring their safety to the greatest extent. Some of the enemies were still threatening, and even killing a few people, trying to force them to stand up. However, it was all in vain. Facing the Han people who were already scared out of their wits, their words did not have any effect. Even if they waved the butcher's knife, They would only kill a few hostages who did not dare to resist. When they realized that the Han people could no longer be used as hostages, and the mercenaries were advancing faster and faster, the Lansang soldiers had no choice but to retreat. Without hostages, the mercenaries could unleash 100% of their strength, and were not afraid of the enemy's counterattack. In the middle of the army, Sang Wenla took the initiative to enter the battlefield, leading his personal guards to command the 100,000 Lansang workers who were woken up from their sleep to use the catapults to launch a counterattack. "General, our soldiers are currently fighting with the mercenaries. If the rocks fall, it will injure the enemy and also our own brothers." One of the captains saw that the enemy was about to attack indiscriminately and anxiously came up to console him. "Scram. It is our soldiers' glory to be able to fight to the death with the mercenaries. Men, throw the rocks, throw them." Sang Wenla already knew that Fan Yuhai had escaped with the cavalry, and at this moment, he was incomparably furious. Does the world think that the mercenaries are invincible? Then I will use my strength to defeat them, and tell the world that the Lansang soldiers are the strongest. The 100,000 workers came to the front of the catapults and pushed the rocks that were prepared during the day over. Then the rocks flew into the air. It looked like a huge commotion. However, in the dark night, without any professional training, the catapults had no accuracy at all. They just hit wherever they hit. The rocks flew in all directions and whistled past everyone's heads before smashing into the ground, creating a huge pit. It created a huge pressure on the soldiers on the battlefield. They are really vicious, even smashing their own people. "Quick, charge with me. As long as we reach the front of the catapults, these things will be useless." Wu Sheng saw a huge rock fly past his head and smash a dozen meters behind him. He couldn't help but grin and suck in a breath of cold air. Then he quickly made a decision and ordered the army to speed up. The huge rocks gave the mercenaries a huge amount of pressure. At the same time, it also gave pressure to the Lansang soldiers and the 40,000 soldiers that Fan Yuhai had abandoned. When they saw the falling rocks, they originally wanted to rely on their numbers to fight it out with the mercenaries. But now they turned and ran. What kind of joke was this? These rocks did not have eyes at all. Before they could even see the mercenaries, they would be smashed to death by the rocks. How unlucky would that be? Sang Wenla, who had originally wanted to use the catapults to turn the situation around, did not know that his actions had caused the army at the front to crumble. The charging mercenaries did not meet with the crazy resistance that they had imagined, and they were getting closer and closer to the enemy. The 2nd Regiment and 3rd Regiment were like two sharp knives. The 20 battalions of auxiliary soldiers were like a huge net, pushing forward from behind. The 30,000 Vietnamese mercenaries were at the back, constantly rescuing the Han civilians and dealing with the small groups that had slipped through the net. At this point, it was worth mentioning that the 2 million silvers were not spent in vain. Under the instructions of Grand Tutor Long Chi, although they managed to obtain the Lansang weapons, they were only half-finished products. When they encountered the incoming Vietnamese mercenaries, they got into formation and engaged in battle. Only then did they discover that the blades and spears in their hands had been broken into two after just a few clashes. The weakness of their weapons dealt a heavy blow to the Lansang soldiers. How could they be a match for steel blades and spears with their bare hands? Thus, many of the Lansang soldiers died with hatred. They did not lose in terms of battle strength, nor did they lose in terms of courage. Instead, they lost in terms of logistics. The speed of the two cold vanguard regiments was too fast. Everyone seemed to be holding their breaths as they advanced at lightning speed. Whenever they met with resistance, they would open fire without hesitation, not giving the enemy a chance to get close. In just an hour, they had broken through the front line and arrived at the center of the camp. The arrival of the cold vanguard regiment was like a hot knife through butter. They arrived in front of the trebuchets, killing the Lansang soldiers and causing them to flee in all directions. Even General Sang Wenla was forced to retreat to Sangnu City under the protection of his personal guards. There were still 50,000 soldiers left behind to guard the city. No matter what, they still had the strength to fight. After charging for over a dozen li, they entered the middle camp from the enemy's front camp, then into the back camp. The cold vanguard regiment was unstoppable. This time, The combat strength that they displayed made the enemy unable to help but change their opinion of them once again. Awesome! Seeing the enemy being forced back to Sangnu City, other than his beloved comrades, there was a group of prisoners kneeling on the ground. The 3rd Regiment Commander Wu Sheng could not help but howl to the sky. However, he also fell to the ground with a plop. At the same time, he was also really tired. After chasing the enemy for over a dozen li, the sky had just turned bright. In other words, they had run so far in just 6 hours. Not to mention running for over a dozen li, they had to keep charging and facing all kinds of problems. Normally, it would be difficult for the Cold Vanguard Regiment to do this. This time, it was because of the strong morale of the soldiers and the anger that they had suppressed previously that they were able to achieve this result. Commander Wu Sheng did not know that all of this was within Yang Chendong's calculations. He knew better than anyone else whether the Han civilians would appear or not. Thus, he had no choice but to retreat during the day and suddenly charge back at night. The officers requesting to fight was also part of his plan. This way, not only could he offset the fact that the enemy had hostages, he could also stimulate the fighting spirit of the outstanding soldiers. It was truly killing 2 birds with 1 stone. No, it should be killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Because these officers were the ones who requested to fight first, he reluctantly agreed to send out troops. This way, even if there were more casualties among the Han hostages, no one would blame him. This was the unanimous opinion of all the officers, and he was just pushing the boat along. Perhaps some people would think that this was the mentality of a careerist. But since ancient times, how could there be no casualties? War was never a case of you advancing and I retreating, and I advancing and you retreating. There would always be all kinds of benefits and problems. For example, the 36 stratagems of the art of war, a battle of wills and courage, you plotting against me, and I plotting against you. On the other hand, history was always written by the victors. No matter how well you did things, once you lost, it was inevitable that others would say that you were pedantic. On the other hand, as long as you did not use 2 heaven-defying methods to win, others would say that you were wise, smart, or even great. This was history. This was the so-called true history that future generations could see. And right now, Yang Chendong had won. He was undoubtedly great, but what others did not know was that this great person was currently experiencing a life-and-death crisis. Li Min Shenkuan. One was the adopted son of the former king of Jiaoji, the other was a high-level assassin sent by Baiming. Originally, these 2 people had nothing to do with each other. Even their lifelines would not be tangled in the slightest. However, because of a common goal, they actually joined forces, and that goal was to kill Yang Chendong. Chapter 579. One was for revenge, and the other was for precaution. Under Fan Yuhai's persuasion, the 2 of them came together. Then, they each led their men who had been trained for many years. When the mercenaries launched an all-out attack in the middle of the night, they bypassed the main army and quietly headed to the rear where Yang Chendong might be hiding. In this battle, in order to achieve the goal of severely injuring the Lansang soldiers and the Jiaoji remnants in one fell swoop, Yang Chendong sent out all his men. Not only did he send out the 2 main regiments, 20 auxiliary battalions, 30,000 Vietnamese mercenaries, even the Wolf Fong Special Forces and the Ghost Sniper team, who were hidden in the dark, were all sent out. It was just to increase the bargaining chip and obtain a greater victory. In this way, Yang Chendong's security force was only left with 60 members of the 1st and 2nd Guard squads. But even so, no one felt that there was any problem. Not to mention that they were originally at the rear of the army. The enemy had no time to deal with the attacks of the mercenaries, so why would anyone come find trouble with them? With the presence of the 1st and 2nd Guard squads, who could rush into the headquarters and hurt Yang Chendong. No one had such strength, so this time, even Tiger Man, who had always been cautious, did not say that he would leave any troops behind to strengthen the young master's security force when he saw the army move out one by one. Now that the battle was the priority, one more person left behind would mean one less force on the battlefield. In the big picture, he would not do this. No one thought that there would be any danger, but the danger really did appear. That was when Yang Chendong stood in front of the sand table, constantly listening to the battle reports from the reconnaissance battalion in front. Just as he was practicing the battle between the two sides, gunshots suddenly rang out from outside. What's going on? Without needing Yang Chendong to ask, Beta Persei immediately walked out. As the sixth young master's inseparable shadow, his existence had always been detached from the rest. Among the 5 guards of the Yang family, he was also ranked the highest. This was also because his responsibility was to ensure the safety of the sixth young master. This task was originally sacred and noble. Second brother, someone is approaching us and has been discovered. Now we have sent people to chase after them. The captain of the first guard squad, Chiovi, flashed out from the darkness and repeated what had just happened. Be careful. Beta Persei nodded. He just thought that some stragglers had accidentally entered here. However, his duty still made him say this very seriously. Don't worry, second brother. Chiovi nodded his head. Although he was a little older than Beta Persei, in terms of duty, especially in the heart of the sixth young master, he was obviously not as important as Beta Persei. It was not a loss to call him second brother. Beta Persei returned to the command center. When he saw Tiger's Mane's questioning gaze, he gently shook his head, indicating that it was not a big deal. After Tiger's Mane gave him a reassuring look, he followed behind Yang Chendong and inserted flags everywhere on the sand table. Bang bang bang. Several gunshots rang out again. This time, the sound seemed to be a little clearer. Beta Persei's figure flashed out again, but not long after he walked back. There were still small groups of enemies appearing, but it was not a big deal. Tiger's Mane continued to assist the sixth young master in completing the military situation analysis on the sand table, but then the third wave of gunshots rang out. This time, without waiting for Beta Persei to rush out of the command center, Tiger's Mane was the first to walk out. If the first time was a coincidence, the second time was an accident, then what was the third time? If it was too much of a coincidence, then it was not a coincidence. Someone had done it on purpose. Soon, Tiger's Mane walked back to the command center, but at this moment his face was not looking good. When he noticed that Yang Chendong was looking at him, he knew that he had to tell the truth. He lowered his head and said, Young master, some unknown enemies suddenly appeared outside. They are like ghosts. They come and go without a trace. 3 of our team members have been injured. Injured? Did you catch the culprit? Yang Chendong was surprised when he heard this. He was well aware of the strength of the guard squad. Putting aside the fact that their training requirements were already higher than the most elite of the cold front, just the sparring sessions with him had already shown how much they had improved. For someone to be able to injure them, and even injure 3 of them in one go, it was only natural that they would be shocked. Tiger's Mane, who was questioned by Yang Chendong, looked a little bitter. After a moment of hesitation, he replied, Our brothers are incompetent. We didn't catch the culprit. They were too fast, and the team members didn't dare to chase after them. They were afraid that they would be lured away. We didn't catch them. This time, Yang Chendong raised his eyebrows, but soon he laughed out loud. Interesting, interesting. It seems that this is a force to be reckoned with. What about the young master? Although Yang Chendong was laughing, Tiger's Mane knew that he was laughing out of anger. How could the master laugh happily when his team members were injured? What do we do? Of course, we hit them. We can't let them act tough in front of us. How about this, if they come again, let the team members chase after them. They can hide for a while in the dark, but I don't believe that they can hide forever. If you see any suspicious targets, shoot. Don't be afraid of wasting bullets, Yang Chendong said fiercely. His smile had long since disappeared. Yes. Tiger's Mane naturally wouldn't disobey Yang Chendong's suggestion. However, there was still a problem, so he asked, Young master, how many people should we send out at once? Let's send out the entire second guard team first. Yang Chendong replied after pondering for a moment. If he sent out too few people, he was afraid that they would fall into the enemy's ambush. The gains would not make up for the losses. The entire second squad had 30 people, and they were used to cooperating with each other. Even if they faced enemies 10 times more than them, there wouldn't be any problems. With the advantage of guns, they could still retreat if they couldn't win. As soon as he heard that the entire second squad would be sent out, Tiger's Mane hesitated for a moment and said, "Young master, isn't it too much?" "Not much, not much. The first time we send out the second squad, if there are still people coming, it proves that the enemy's strength and numbers won't be too small. Then we'll send out the first squad as well." After saying this, Yang Chendong glanced at Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei. He wanted to send out the two of them as well. After all, the enemy's goal must be to target him. And if there wasn't a good enough opportunity, they wouldn't easily appear. Therefore, it was best not to leave anyone around him to ensure that he could lure out the killer. However, he also knew that even if he said so, the two of them would not agree. Other things could be discussed, but when it came to their own safety, they would not execute it even if they were beaten to death. Being able to withdraw the two guard squads was already the biggest concession they could make. Tiger's Mane didn't know that Yang Chendong wanted to send him out, because even if the first guard team was sent out, he would have already jumped to his feet. No, absolutely not. Looking at Tiger's Mane's desperate look, Yang Chendong was moved, but he pretended to be angry and said, "What? You're the young master, and I'm the young master. If I say it's okay, then it's okay. Beta Persei, beat him up." "Okay." Beta Persei naturally followed Yang Chendong's lead. As long as it was the young master's order, he would completely carry it out, never caring whether it was right or wrong. Therefore, at this moment he smiled and clenched his fists. There was a creaking sound as he stretched his muscles and bones. Tiger's Mane's strength was originally on par with Beta Persei. One was agile, and the other was strong. However, Beta Persei's fists were really not to be trifled with. Once he got hit, it would definitely not feel good. Unless it was a battle of life and death, Tiger's Mane would usually be at a disadvantage in a contest like this. The enemy was right beside him, and no one knew what would happen next. If he was injured at this time, it might delay the important matters. A wise man knows when to retreat. For the sake of the overall situation, Tiger's Mane finally chose to give in. Okay, don't do it. I'll listen to your orders." "Okay, Beta Persei, I'll spare him this time." Luckily you know what's good for you. Otherwise, I would have sent you out too," Yang Chendong said. After he said this, he could see Tiger's Mane's unyielding expression. Obviously, sending out the first guard team was already his limit. Unless he was killed, he would never agree to transfer him out too. Although he had now agreed to Yang Chendong's request, Tiger's Mane still had hope in his heart. Perhaps sending out the second guard team would be enough, and the enemy would not come again. Such thoughts were destined to be disappointed. Just 10 minutes after the second guard team was sent out, gunshots were heard again. The enemies hiding in the dark had made their move again, and there were quite a few of them. As Yang Chendong said before, they saw the hope of luring the tiger away from the mountain. This time they should have put in a lot of effort. "Young master, please reconsider." Tiger's Mane, who was in the command center, did not immediately execute the order. Instead, he still held a glimmer of hope as he spoke to Yang Chendong. "Go, follow the order just now." Yang Chendong waved his hand casually. This time the enemy's target was obviously him. Although it was said that as long as he could restrain his temper, it would be very difficult for the enemy to kill him. However, he did not like the feeling of being on guard against the enemy at all times. He preferred to take the initiative to attack and strangle all dangers in the cradle. Since the other party was determined to kill him, he would fulfill the other party's wish and send everyone out to lure them out. Sigh. With a sigh, Tiger's Mane knew that the result could not be changed. He could only reluctantly walk out of the command center. At this moment, Yang Chendong's voice came from behind him. "Don't play tricks. Otherwise, even if you can fool the young master, you won't be able to fool the enemy. You understand?" Chapter 580. Tiger's Man couldn't help but pause. Originally, he wanted to leave some people behind in the dark. Although he believed that with just him and Beta Persei around, no matter how many people came, it would be difficult to get past them and reach the young master. But wouldn't it be better to leave one more person behind? But now that Yang Chendong added on, he finally calmed down. That's right. To be able to cause the security squad to be somewhat helpless, One could imagine the strength and combat strength of the enemy. If you want to leave someone behind without being discovered by them, that would be even more impossible. Tiger's man walked out of the headquarters with his head lowered. He called the captain of the first guard team, Chiu V. Captain Chiu, if the enemy appears again, can you go and destroy them? Tiger's man's murderous aura overflowed as he said these words. It was obvious that he was really angered by these killers who seemed to be everywhere. The enemies were difficult to deal with because they relied on the darkness and were very agile. Once they were discovered, those people would immediately retreat frantically. However, the guard team could only stay in place due to their duties. Naturally, they would suffer a little. However, Chou immediately regained his confidence when he heard that they could chase after the enemy. He patted his chest and said like a soldier, "Who too, if you let us out, I guarantee that we can kill those shameful bastards until they cry for their parents. None of them will be left alive." "Okay, then if the enemy appears to harass us later, you guys will chase after them and kill them. Remember, you must end the battle quickly. Also, send out the first guard team." Tiger's man was a little reluctant when he said this. When Chiovi heard that he could go out and kill the enemy, he was so happy that he was about to agree. But when he suddenly heard that he was going to send them all out, he couldn't help but be stunned. "If we send them all out, who will be responsible for the safety of the sixth young master?" That's exactly what the young master meant. He was worried that it would be dangerous if too few people went out, so he sent everyone out. "Naturally, Beta Persei and I will be responsible for the safety here. If you're really worried, then go and come back quickly. This is a military order. Execute it." After saying this, Tiger's man turned around and walked towards the command center. He was worried that he would change his mind if he stayed any longer. Although he had never disobeyed Yang Qindong's orders, for some reason, he couldn't help but do it this time. Chiovi was left standing on the spot with a dumbfounded expression. With his intelligence, he quickly realized that this must be the sixth young master's plan to lure the snake out of its hole. When he recalled how the sixth young master had toyed with the security team, he couldn't help but say, with the sixth young master's ability, there shouldn't be anyone who can hurt him. But for safety's sake, I should finish this quickly and come back to support him. As if he had made a decision, Chiovi began to assemble the first security team. After a while, gunshots rang out from outside again, and then they went further and further away. In the command center, when gunshots rang out again, Tiger's man walked out of the door alone. Then, he held a tri-edge bayonet in his hand and stood there like an ordinary guard. He knew very well that when masters fought, the ability of the gun in their hands was limited. Even at close range, the enemy would not give you any chance to shoot. Since that was the case, it was safer to just hold the bayonet. Beta Persei did not leave. He stood guard in the inner door of the command center, and did not take anything. This was because his weapon was a pair of iron fists. In addition, he was tall and strong to begin with. At this time, he stood there like a door god. On the other hand, Yang Qindong did not seem to take what was happening outside seriously. He was still standing in front of the sand table, looking at the situation of both sides and imagining what the front line had become. 500 meters away from the command center, 10 black figures were slowly approaching. They were all dressed in black and walked in the dark. Their footsteps were extremely light, and their speed was very fast. Even the night vision goggles could not capture their figures. "You sent them all out? Hehe, this loyal duke is really young and full of vigor. He is very arrogant," a black-clothed man said, and the corners of his mouth revealed a creepy smile. "That's right, he is indeed very arrogant. However, since he doesn't put us in his eyes, he can only suffer the consequences of his own actions. Brother Shin, this time, our names will go down in history." Another black-clothed man chuckled coldly. If the king of Jiaoji, Li Li, was here, he would definitely recognize that the person who spoke was his adopted son, Li Min, who was known as the top master in Jiaoji. As for the brother Shin he was talking about, it was naturally the messenger sent by Baiming, Shin Kuan. The situation at the front line was not satisfactory. The mercenaries suddenly turned around and attacked. They did not cherish the lives of the Han people during the day. This indeed caught Fan Yuhai off guard. However, this also gave the two of them an opportunity. They led their most elite subordinates through the edge of the battlefield and arrived at the rear. When they thought of the possibility of meeting the Ming Dynasty's loyal duke and even killing him, the two of them could not help but feel their blood boil. However, they were disappointed to see that there were dozens of guards here. Moreover, each of them had extraordinary skills. The aura they exuded was even stronger than ordinary martial artists. No matter how confident Li Min and Shen Kuan were, they could not guarantee that they could break through these guards and arrive in front of Yang Qindong. However, if they were to leave just like that, they would be unwilling to do so. This was why they constantly harassed and even injured people with arrows in their sleeves. Originally, they wanted to annoy Yang Qindong. If he hid in his shell like a coward and did not come out, then they would continuously attack him. Even if they could not hurt him, they would make him angry. Perhaps the opportunity would come when he was angry. However, they did not expect that after just 3 rounds of harassment, these guards would actually rush out. This sudden turn of events made Li Li and Shen Kuan very agitated. They tried to send a group of people to lure these guards further and further away, and then sent a second group of people to test the waters. Sure enough, these guards rushed out again. They counted a total of 60 people. In other words, the loyal duke should not have any forces around him. So it was time for them to make a move. This was definitely an opportunity, although it looked more like a trap. But no matter what, they had to take a gamble because if they did not gamble now, they were afraid that it would be very difficult to find such an opportunity in the future. So they appeared. After leaving more than a dozen people in the periphery responsible for restraining the guards who might come back at any time, each of them took 4 of their most elite subordinates and appeared. All of you listen carefully. In a while, we will attack with all our might. We don't need to kill the enemy immediately. Just keep the 2 of them occupied. We don't have much time. Those brothers lured the guards away with the determination to die. At most, we have the time for an incense stick to burn. If we still don't succeed, we will retreat immediately and look for another opportunity. Li Min was the one who spoke. As he spoke, the corners of his mouth twitched. His heart ached for Yang Qindong. The people he brought with him this time were all experts who had followed him for many years. They could be considered as men of sacrifice. These people risked their lives to lure away the guards in order to create enough opportunities for them. When he thought of the possibility of killing Yang Qindong, and the possibility that his men would not be able to survive, he felt as if his heart had been cut by a knife. At this moment, he hated Yang Qindong even more. He believed that all the results were caused by this person. This was what it meant to condemn someone. When a person always wants to harm others, and therefore has to pay some price, they will still put the blame on the victim. Do they have to think that when they want to harm others, others should stand there and let them be cut into pieces? Is that the right thing to do? At the entrance of the headquarters, Tiger's Mane had already extinguished the torch inserted here. He stood in the darkness, opened up his 5 senses, and carefully and cautiously observed everything around him. If he alone could eliminate the assassins who came out of nowhere, young master would not have to take the risk. This was naturally the best outcome. So at this moment, Tiger's Mane was full of fighting spirit and murderous intent. His whole body was focused, waiting for the enemy to appear. Whoosh! A small arrow suddenly shot out from the darkness, aiming at the position where Tiger's Mane was standing. In the darkness, the direction of the arrow could not be seen at all. Only a murderous aura appeared in the air. The previous guard was injured by this sudden arrow because of his carelessness. However, if they wanted to use the same method to deal with Tiger's Mane, it was obviously not enough. Tiger's Mane suddenly jumped to the side, feeling the danger, and dodged the attack. At the same time, as he fell to the ground, his roar spread in all directions. "Who are you? You only know how to plot against me." Just as the words left his mouth and his body came into close contact with the ground, for Saber Cheese suddenly slashed towards him from different directions. Ding ding dang dang. In that moment, Tiger's Mane's military knife collided with the 4 steel swords. The 4 assassins suddenly appeared, suddenly attacked, and suddenly attacked, in order to injure Tiger's Mane in the shortest time possible. Since he was able to stand guard outside the command center, his skills must not be simple. Perhaps this was what the Duke of Loyalty relied on. Thinking about it, if he killed this pillar of support, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage's expression would be very good. Although the four assassins thought highly of Tiger's Mane's ability and attacked with all their strength, they still did not injure the opponent. Instead, Tiger's Mane stood up like a carp and laughed. So it's four reckless dogs bark. Watch me take your lives. Tiger's Mane would not shout for no reason. This was to remind young master in the headquarters that four enemies had appeared. Chapter 581. The military knife in his hand shone with a cold light. In an extremely short period of time, Hu Meng had exchanged more than 10 blows with the four of them. He had also slowly changed from his initial arrogance to defense. The strength of these four people was too strong, especially when they were using a joint attack technique. When the two of them worked together, they were able to exert a combat power that was several times higher than their own strength. If it was one-on-one, Tiger's Mane was confident that he could take down any one of them within 10 moves. However, in the face of a joint attack technique and four opponents at that, he was a little overwhelmed and had no choice but to switch from attacking to defending. In the command center, the sound of weapons colliding could be heard from outside. Beta Persei, who was standing there, felt his heart throb. Obviously, he was affected by the murderous aura outside, and could not help but feel his hands and feet itch. Go help Tiger's Mane. I can feel that the people who are coming are not weak. Yang Chendong finally stopped looking at the sand table, and said to Beta Persei very seriously, "Young master, I have to protect your safety." Beta Persei also knew the urgency of the situation, and even knew what his mission was. This was one of the rare occasions when Beta Persei obeyed orders and did not carry out them. He looked at Yang Chendong with amusement. Well, don't you know the strength of the young master? You have to have confidence in your young master. Go. Yang Chendong chuckled. Oh, it was unknown if Yang Chendong's smile had infected Beta Persei, or if he really had great confidence in the strength of the young master. After agreeing, Beta Persei pulled open the curtain of the command center and rushed out. Tiger's Mane, you're too weak. Let me help you. Get lost. Go back and protect the young master. You're not needed here. Even though Tiger's Mane had already been forced back a few steps, his voice still rang out like a roar. Unfortunately, Beta Persei came under the orders of the sixth young master. How could he care about Tiger's Mane? He roared and rushed into the battle, instantly sharing the firepower and attracting the attention of the other two players. Because of this, Tiger's Mane's pressure was reduced. Finally, he no longer had to retreat and defend passively. He could now consider counterattacking and killing the enemy. However, before they could start their counterattack, another four shadowy figures jumped out and surrounded them. There were a total of 8 of them, and this was the last of Shen Kuan's strength. With another 4 people joining in, it was now 2 against 8. Naturally, the pressure was not small. Fortunately, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei often worked together over the years, especially when dealing with Yang Chendong. They had formed a tacit understanding. In addition, Beta Persei was still a little better than Tiger's Mane in terms of skill. Although it was only a little, it could often determine the final outcome. Whoosh! While they were fighting happily, 2 more shadowy figures suddenly appeared and rushed to the command center. They were the leaders of this assassination, Li Min and Shen Kuan. They were both absolute masters and had reached the ability to identify people by breathing. After they knew that there was only a single breath in the command center, they knew that the best opportunity had come. They rushed in without hesitation. Unlike outside, there were a few kerosene lamps lit in the command center, making it as bright as day. Therefore, when Li Min and Shen Kuan rushed in, they couldn't help but squint their eyes to adapt to the environment. When they saw that Yang Chendong was indeed the only one there, the 2 of them laughed mischievously. While they were laughing, Yang Chendong was also laughing. Both of you, I'm Yang Chendong, the Great Ming's loyal duke. May I know your name? Do you want to know our names and origins and then take revenge afterwards? Let me tell you, no way. A sneer flashed across Shen Kuan's face. Although he didn't think that Yang Chendong could still live past today, who knew if the other party still had any tricks up his sleeve? If he reported his name and word got out, Wouldn't it be a pile of shit whether he killed him or not? Shen Kuan had no intention of reporting his name. He just wanted to complete the mission as soon as possible. He even couldn't help but attack. However, Li Min reached out and stopped him. Then he looked at Yang Chendong with an arrogant expression and said, "A real man doesn't change his name or surname. I'm Li Min, the adopted son of the king of Jiaoji. He's Shen Kuan, Baiming's special envoy." "Brother Li Yu." Shen Kuan didn't expect Li Min to sell him out directly. Anger appeared on his face. "Brother Shen, don't be angry. Do you think that he can still escape from the joint attack of the two of us? Even if he has some tricks up his sleeve, no one can save him at such a close distance. Don't worry." Li Min smiled at Shen Kuan and looked at Yang Chendong again. She said in a condescending manner, "Promise me one thing and I'll let you die quickly so you won't have to suffer so much." "Condition? Let's hear it." Yang Chendong had a curious look on his face. "Immediately write an order to release my adopted father and allow him to establish a new kingdom." Li Min's voice was very firm, as if he was ordering something. Just now, Yang Chendong was still curious as to how the other party had exposed his identity. His question was just a casual thought. He didn't think that the other party would really reveal his identity and origin. Only now did he understand that Li Min still had the idea of helping her foster father, Li, restore the country. Ha 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 ha. Yang Chendong couldn't help but laugh loudly after knowing Li Min's thoughts. "What are you laughing at?" Li Min was very confused by Yang Chendong's expression, who was about to die. "I'm laughing at your idiocy." Yang Chendong seemed to be holding back his laughter as he spoke. Then his expression suddenly turned serious, and he said in a questioning tone with a trace of pressure, "You're just an assassin who can't see the light of day. What right do you have to order me? A duke of the great Ming Dynasty. Do you have the right?" With a loud shout, Li Min involuntarily took 3 steps back before coming to a stop. Then, her face was filled with anger and murderous intent. He was the #1 expert of the Jiaoji kingdom, but he actually took 3 steps back because of Li Min's angry shout. If this spread out, wouldn't he be laughed at by others? At this moment, his killing intent when he looked at Yang Chendong was even stronger. "Good, you dare to laugh at me. I hope you can still maintain this backbone and be so stubborn when I capture you." Bullshit expert. You only know how to talk. If you want to fight, then come." Yang Chendong's face didn't have the slightest trace of fear. If it wasn't because he wanted to know who wanted to deal with him, if it wasn't because he didn't want to be on the lookout for thieves every day, did these two people think they could meet him? Did they really think that he was some kind of powerful figure? Li Min was infuriated by Li Min's disdain. His gaze turned cold, and he opened his mouth to spit out the word kill. Another person was even faster than him and rushed towards Yang Chendong. He was Shen Kuan. Since his identity had been exposed, he had to kill Yang Chendong today. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would bring an unimaginable disaster to Baiming. A cold light flashed, and a sword light went straight for Li Min's throat. As expected of the nickname of the 13 swords, Shen Kuan used a killing move as soon as he attacked. He didn't have the intention to hold Li Min hostage. The sword light swept over. If he really succeeded, then Li Min's life would be gone forever. Yang Chendong calmly looked at the scene. He calculated the distance between the tip of the sword and his throat in his mind. At this time he could use at least 3 ways to avoid the attack. However, he didn't do so. He wanted to see how powerful his opponent was. He wanted to find a way to stimulate the qi in his body so that it could be used and played better. It was often the easiest to break through between life and death. Clang! A blade light suddenly appeared and blocked the advance of the long sword, forcing it to stop half a meter in front of Yang Chendong. F***CK. Yang Chendong was thinking of using the battle of life and death to sharpen and stimulate himself. He didn't expect that someone would come out of nowhere and disrupt his steps. He couldn't help but feel very depressed. The person who attacked was naturally Li Min. With a horizontal strike of her blade, she blocked the attack of the longsword. However, because of this, anger appeared on Shen Kuan's face. "Li Min, why did you stop me?" "Wait a minute. I haven't asked him to write the military order yet. He can't die." Li Min shook his head. Although he said that he wanted to negotiate, his face was very firm. Shin Kuan wanted to scold him for being an idiot. However, considering that he was no match for him, he could only snort coldly and stand aside. From the looks of it, it was clear that Li Min was going to take control of the situation. Just now when he attacked, Yang Chendong stood there like a fool and didn't move at all. This gave the two killers incomparable confidence. This Yang Chendong was really a scholar who couldn't even trust a chicken. Li Min naturally saw Yang Chendong's performance just now. Now she was very confident. She looked at Yang Chendong with a look of charity and said, "I said, write the military order immediately. Otherwise, not only will you die, but you will also die very miserably." "TSK, as if you won't kill me if I write it." Yang Chendong snorted and looked very clear. "Duke of Loyalty, you have to know that there are several kinds of death. One kind is called living a life worse than death. I don't know if you want to have a taste of it." Li Min threatened again. At the same time, she admired Yang Chendong's performance in her heart. He was worthy of being called the god of war. At least this kind of determination was something that few people could match. "I don't want to," Yang Chendong said without any surprise. This also made Li Min's eyes flash with pride. Just when she thought that she had scared the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong suddenly said, "Who do you think you are? Can you really hurt me? It's better to kneel down and surrender now. Maybe I can give you a quick death if I'm happy. Otherwise, I think you don't want to taste the feeling of living a life worse than death." Chapter 582. What? He originally thought that the other party had given in, but unexpectedly, the other party began to threaten him. Li Min, who thought that he had misheard, widened his eyes in disbelief. On the other hand, Shen Kuan clearly heard the words just now. Although he did not know where Yang Chendong's confidence came from, he did not mind him repeating the words just now. "Brotherly, he wants you to learn from a dog and kneel on the ground and beg for surrender. Do you really not want to live anymore?" Li Min's face was flushed red. Obviously, he was very angry. The veins on his right hand that was holding the knife suddenly popped out. He looked like he was going to kill someone at any time. Shen Kuan's words had provoked him to the point that he wanted to kill someone. "TSK, as if you said that you won't do anything to me." Yang Chendong rolled his eyes and said as if he was joking. "Very well, then I will kill and cut off your legs. Anyway, I don't need them to write." Li Min, who had been successfully enraged, decided to give Yang Chendong a taste of his strength first. Anyway, he did not intend to let the other party die so easily. He would slowly torture him. He raised his right hand, and the knife was like a gust of wind, directly chopping towards Yang Chendong's legs. Li Min did not intend to hold back this time. This was originally a game of life and death. Whoever had a merciful heart did not deserve to play this game of death. Shen Kuan watched from the side. Yang Chendong, who had lost his legs, could no longer pose any threat to Bai Ming. After all, have you ever seen a powerful person who did not even have legs? How could such a person be qualified to compete for the world's hegemony? Under the gaze of both sides, Yang Chendong, who seemed to be dead for sure, smiled at this moment. Did he really think that he was a soft persimmon? Did he think that he could teach him a lesson with a knife? Well, then he would use facts to prove that anyone who dared to look down on him would have to pay a heavy price, or even lose their lives. Even before the saber arrived, it brought with it a wave of saber energy. If an ordinary person were to face this saber attack, they would be scared silly. Li Min and Shen Kuan were also looking forward to seeing Yang Chendong's stupefied expression. However, they were destined to be disappointed. Just as the blade was about to reach his legs, the sixth young master leaped into the air and easily dodged the blade. While he was still in mid-air, he executed a divine dragon tail whip. His feet, which were clad in military boots, smashed towards Li Min's shoulder like a huge rock. Feeling the power of this kick, Li Min's expression changed greatly. He had a feeling that if this kick landed, his shoulder blade would be completely shattered. At the critical moment, he hurriedly retreated, wanting to avoid this heavy blow. As expected of the number one expert in the Jiaoji kingdom, Li Min's reaction was as quick as a fox, causing the huge foot to miss. Just as he was about to stabilize his body, He was drenched in cold sweat. Another kick was aimed at his face. Bang! The heavy blow landed on his face like a ruthless slap. Under the force of the kick, Li Min's entire body spun 360 degrees, and then fell to the ground with a thud. Chain kick. Shin Kuan, who originally wanted to watch the show, suddenly spoke up. Then he put away his careless expression and became serious. Wrong, it's 3 consecutive kicks. Both of his feet had already landed on the ground, and he said with a face full of arrogance. Originally, his personality was not that serious. However, due to his position, he had to make some changes. Usually, other than when he was with his wives, he had to pretend to be deep and serious. Now that there were no outsiders around, he could finally be himself for a while. His arrogant and somewhat arrogant side was revealed. The 3 consecutive kicks were the strengthening board of the chain kick. It allowed one to kick 3 times consecutively in an extremely short period of time to achieve the goal of injuring others. This was learned from Wang Yong, who was extremely good at leg techniques. With the existence of the qi, not only was he better at using it than Wang Yong, but the power was also amplified. Pooh! Li Min spat out a mouthful of blood from his mouth, along with 2 teeth. He slowly stood up from the ground. A very obvious footprint was imprinted on Li Min's face, making him look very miserable. Very good. It turns out that we have all underestimated you. Not only did Li Min have such thoughts, Shen Kuan also had the same thoughts. How could someone who could casually kick 3 consecutive kicks be easy to bully? However, he was very curious. When did this person learn martial arts? Ever since Yang Chendong appeared in the capital of Baiming and did a series of big things, everything related to him had been thoroughly investigated by the Imperial Secret Service and the East Faction Guards. However, no matter how he looked at it, this person did not have the time to learn martial arts. It was precisely because the information provided was too comprehensive that they never thought that Yang Chendong knew martial arts. Of course, this was also the result of Baiming not communicating with the Southern Ming Empire. Otherwise, if you asked Guan Ying and the other generals of the Southern Ming Empire, they would immediately give you a clear attitude. Although the fact that Yang Chendong knew martial arts was somewhat out of Shen Kuan's expectations, he immediately understood everything. He could not help but coldly say, "So that's how it is. The reason why you dared to wait for us here alone is because of your martial arts?" Bingo, your answer is correct. It seems that you are not stupid. However, don't your superiors know that if you failed to assassinate me, would Baiming be able to withstand my anger? Yang Chendong gave Shen Kuan a "you are considered smart" expression, then asked a question that the other party could not answer. Humph. Since he could not answer, Shen Kuan naturally did not need to answer. He just snorted coldly and looked at Li Min originally. His identity was confidential. Even if they wanted to investigate, they would not be able to find any relationship between him and Baiming. However, it was all Li Min's fault. He was too arrogant and exposed his identity. If they could not kill Yang Chendong today, the next unlucky one would be the Southern Ming Empire. Don't look at me like that. Today he will definitely die here. Li Min naturally understood Shen Kuan's intention, but he did not care. He had always been the type to not give up until he achieved his goal. At the same time, he was also a person who would do anything to achieve his goal. Therefore, he had made sufficient preparations. If he did not succeed, he would die for a righteous cause. Li Min said decisively and was even more absolute. This also increased Shen Kuan's desire to silence him. He nodded. Okay, in that case, the 2 of us will work together to kill him. Okay. This time Li Min did not refuse arrogantly. Firstly, there was not much time left for them. Secondly, Yang Chendong had shown a certain level of strength, which was worthy of his attention. See, I told you. The 2 of you should have come together long ago. Otherwise, I'm afraid you won't have time to show off. My men are coming back. Yang Chendong was not the slightest bit afraid of the 2 of them working together. On the contrary, he was full of fighting spirit. In the past, when he fought with the guards, he had to leave some leeway and could only give them some minor injuries. How could it be more satisfying than a life-and-death battle now? You will regret it. Seeing Yang Chendong so confident, Li Min's eyes flashed with anger. Then, his figure suddenly rushed forward and the big sword in his hand was swung halfway. On the other side, Shen Kuan also drew a flower with his long sword and passed it to Yang Chendong from the other side. What was different from before was that he also had a sword in his left hand. Now he was using two swords at the same time. Come on! Yang Chendong didn't show the slightest trace of fear, even though he was fighting against two experts by himself. On the contrary, with a loud shout, a military knife appeared in his hand, and he faced the sword and saber head-on. Ding dang dang, ding dang dang. In a very short period of time, the three of them continuously exchanged more than a dozen moves. After that, they separated again and stood in a triangle. Although it was only a dozen moves, Li Min was a little out of breath. In a fight between masters, the slightest difference would often result in a head falling to the ground. Every move required countless calculations in the brain. Compared to Li Min, Shen Kuan's strength was slightly weaker. Hence, his breathing was even more violent. After he stopped, he actually took 3 deep breaths before his complexion once again returned to its ready state. Moreover, when he looked at Yang Chendong, his gaze was a little more cautious. Among the three of them, Yang Chendong performed the best. As long as he had the time, he would train with the warriors and constantly increase his own strength. This short exchange of blows did not make him feel anything. It was because he did not feel anything that he looked at Li Min and Shen Kuan with some displeasure. What? Didn't you eat when you came? You want to kill me with these moves? I think you should go back and drink milk from your mother first. Impudent. Hearing Yang Chendong humiliating him like this, Li Min roared and stepped forward again. The strength of the big sword in his hand increased a little, so that when he swung the sword, there was a heavy chi. Li Min was an orphan. He did not know what his mother looked like. Therefore, people who knew him would never mention anything about his parents in front of him. Yang Chendong said it, which naturally made him angry. At this moment he released all his strength through his arm. Ding ding dang. After just one hit, Yang Chendong felt the military knife in his arm sink. He had to take 2 steps back to avoid the sharp edge and at the same time, completely dispersing the force. Not bad, this is a little interesting. Knowing that Li Min was using all his strength, Yang Chendong said as he mobilized the chi in his body. Suddenly, his whole body's momentum rose. Once again, Yang Chendong took the initiative to attack. The military knife in his hand was used as a big sword to meet the big sword in Li Min's hand. Ding 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 ding. Using brute force against brute force, the two of them clashed dozens of times in a very short period of time. Finally, Li Min took 5 or 6 steps back and stopped the fight. Fortunately, the quality of the weapons on both sides was quite good. Otherwise, the steel saber would have been broken before the strength was exhausted from the collision. Chapter 583. Li Min's face was pale as he retreated. Just a moment ago, he felt that his right arm was swollen. Now when he tried to lift it, he felt extremely sore. For a long time, he had boasted that he was the strongest and had never met an opponent. But now, the facts had told him that there was always someone stronger than him. And the person who was stronger than him was Yang Chendong. I'll do it. Shen Kuan naturally saw that Li Min had suffered internal injuries. As an ally, he had to do his best. With a loud shout, the long sword in his hand flew towards Yang Chendong like a snake flicking its tongue. When he leaped up, the flying swords in his hands flew out. Then he drew his sword and threw it again. In the blink of an eye, 12 of the 13 swords flew out. The sword net was like a swarm of bees. Yang Chendong first stared at the 12 sword winds seriously. When the sword tips were about to land in front of him, he suddenly thrust the military knife in his hand forward and pointed it straight at the swords. You're courting death. Seeing that Yang Chendong actually pointed casually in the midst of the swords, a cold killing intent flashed across Shen Kuan's face. This was his famous unique skill, the 100 sword fingers. 12 swords formed a net of sword attacks. Even when he faced Li Min before, she could only retreat to avoid the attack. However, when it was Yang Chendong, he did not dodge at all. Wasn't that just courting death? At this moment, Shen Kuan seemed to see Yang Chendong being pierced full of holes by the sword net. At that time, he would return to Baiming with the identity of having successfully assassinated Yang Chendong. If he wasn't a hero, then what was he? From then on, his Shen family's reputation would be glorified because of him. At that time, it was not impossible for him to have a wife and a son. With a smile on his face, he seemed to have seen a beautiful future. However, his body suddenly stopped moving forward. He intuitively felt that the tip of the sword seemed to be blocked. He looked at the sword, and what he saw made him turn pale with fright. His whole body trembled. The tip of the sword was perfectly blocked by the tip of the stiletto. It was as if the two weapons were connected together, and no one could see any gap between them. Shen Kun was really frightened. The other party had not only dodged the attacks of the 12 flying swords with a casual wave of his hand, but he was also able to locate the body of his last sword. He was even able to hit the tip of the sword and successfully block it. What kind of speed did this require? What kind of eyesight? What kind of power? Shen Kun was still shocked. This was something that even Li Min couldn't do. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his arm. He saw his opponent's stiletto circling around in the air, and his sword seemed to be attracted to it as it circled around as well. After a dozen or so rounds, a huge force came and separated the two weapons. At this moment, Shen Kuan's arm had been twisted like a fried dough twist. Not to mention that his clothes were torn, even the bones in his arm were exposed. The white bones piercing out of his flesh were very obvious. The miserable state of his arm made Shen Kun involuntarily cry out. He was frightened and in pain. What a ruthless move. Li Min at the side had already adjusted his breathing. The pain in his arm was not as unbearable as before, but when he saw this scene, he couldn't help but feel his whole body go numb. They were humans, not gods. No one would be able to withstand this kind of pain. Not to mention, his right arm was completely crippled. For a swordsman, this was equivalent to having no future. Am I ruthless? Compared to you wanting to take my life, I am already very merciful. Yang Chendong looked at Li Min with a smile, but no matter how one looked at it, there was a murderous aura in that smile. Since Yang Chendong was able to break the 100-finger sword in one move, if he wanted to kill Shen Kun, it wouldn't be easy, but it definitely wouldn't be too difficult. However, he only crippled one of Shen Kun's arms. No matter how one looked at it, it was considered merciful. Don't think that you are really powerful and invincible. I don't believe that no matter how powerful you are, you can't be more powerful than explosives. He seemed to know that he was no match for Yang Chendong in terms of strength. At least it wouldn't be easy for him to kill Shen Kun. Moreover, the scene of the knife versus the military knife just now had already shown him the true strength of Yang Chendong. Since he couldn't win in terms of strength, he would use his ultimate move. This was also Li Min's trump card. As soon as Li Min's voice fell, he tore open the night-traveling clothes in front of him, revealing his chest that was covered in explosives. The explosives were prepared by Fan Yuhai, and Li Min had agreed to it. What he pursued was to succeed or die trying. If he couldn't kill Yang Chendong, then he would just perish together with him. The explosives on his body might not be as powerful as the ones in the warehouse or the military factory, but if they were ignited, it should be no problem to blow up the command center. Yang Chendong's body trembled. Then he shook his head and said slowly, "In order to kill me, you really put in a lot of effort. How is it? Do you know fear now?" After revealing his trump card, Li Min's face became ferocious, and at this moment he also became crazy, as if he was already a winner. "Not bad, it looks very powerful, but in this way, aren't you going to die? Your adoptive father won't be able to restore his country. Is this also your goal? Okay, you don't have to persuade me. Let me tell you, no matter what you say, this time I will definitely die. As for the restoration of the country, as long as you die, General Fan will definitely find a way to save my godfather. Then who can stop them?" At this time, Li Min was completely a lunatic. She laughed wildly, not showing the slightest bit of fear because she was about to die. After listening to Li Min's words, Yang Chendong nodded thoughtfully. "Sure enough, your backer is Fan Yuhai. Not bad, no matter what. I know who wants to kill me. Since that's the case, then come, let's see if you can really blow me up." Shen Kun was sent by Baiming, so it was needless to say who his backer was. As for Li Min, was this his own action? Or was there someone supporting him behind the scenes? Now that he had brought up the name of General Fan, the problem was naturally clear. Since the details of both of them were clear, it was time to end the battle. Although this kind of close combat for Yang Chendong could better use his qi and improve his combat power. But since he had a large warehouse in his hand, why would he stupidly use a cold weapon to fight? This was exactly what a wise person would do, playing up one's shortcomings and avoiding one's strengths. Facing Li Min, who was tied with explosives, Yang Chendong's expression was calm, and if one looked carefully, there was even a trace of disdain. After Li Min saw this, it made him even angrier. Although he was an orphan, no matter what he did since he was young, he always strived to be the best. No matter what he did, he could always gain the respect of others. But now he was being looked down upon. What, do you really think I don't dare to detonate the explosives and die with you? Provoked, Li Min laughed maniacally, and then his eyes revealed a crazed look. He pulled the fuse on his body with his arm. Sizzle. Green smoke rose, indicating that the gunpowder had been ignited and was about to explode. Ha ha ha, bold and loyal, so what? You're going to die here, just like a nobody like me. When the time comes, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, what's the difference between us? Li Min, who seemed to have entered a crazed state, laughed maniacally, as if he had gotten what he wanted. As long as he could kill Yang Chendong, Fan Yuhai would have a lot more opportunities, and there would be hope for his godfather to restore Jiaoji. In this way, his death was completely worth it. You're crazy. Shin Kuan, who was half kneeling on the ground, pointed at Li Min with his left hand, his mouth agape. He did not know if his cold sweat was caused by fear, or by the pain caused by Yang Chendong's heavy injury. In order to achieve your goal, you'll do anything. You do have the potential to be a hero. Unfortunately, you've chosen me as your opponent, so you're destined to get nothing, only death. Facing Li Min, whose fuse was getting shorter and shorter, Yang Chendong evaluated him as a winner. Then, a mysterious smile appeared on his face. Following that, he suddenly disappeared from where he stood. No matter how glib your tongue is, you're still going to. Li Min, who was about to mock Yang Chendong, suddenly realized that his opponent had disappeared. Not only that, even his aura had disappeared. He was an assassin, an ace assassin, the #1 expert in Jiaoji. He was confident that Yang Chendong did not use any tricks to hide, just like how Japanese ninjas would use the principle of light refraction to suddenly disappear. But no matter what, that kind of disappearance was only the disappearance of the body, but if one were to sense it carefully, the aura was still there. Moreover, a true expert could kill by tracking the aura. However, Yang Chendong did not even leave behind a trace of his aura. It was as if he had never appeared here in the first place. What's going on? Where is he? Seeing that the fuse was about to be lit, and the target had disappeared, Li Min felt so depressed that he was about to vomit blood. He's not a human, he's a demon. Shin Kuan, who was kneeling on the ground, was also searching for Yang Chendong's aura, but he did not find anything. At this moment he could not help but shout, as if his spirit had been completely destroyed, and he looked like a crazy demon. Boom. Time did not give the two of them a chance to speak again. The explosives were finally ignited, and then it caused a huge explosion. Although the composition of the explosives was not at its strongest state, it was not a problem to flatten the surrounding 5 to 6 meters. Thus, more than half of the command center was destroyed by the impact of the explosives. At the same time, the two high-level assassins, Li Min and Shin Kuan, were also destroyed. Chapter 584. Young Master. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, who were fighting with the killers outside the headquarters, looked back in shock. Looking at the headquarters that had been mostly destroyed and the loud rumbling in their ears, their eyes turned from black to white and then to red. They had really gone crazy. The young master was like a god in their eyes. The young master was the guiding light of their life, and the young master was their soul. But now that their souls were gone, how could they continue to live? Kill. At this moment, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei burst out at the same time. Facing 4 extremely powerful killers, they all showed their most violent side. and their strength had more than doubled in a short period of time. Speaking of which, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei's foundation was not very good. They were not the kind of people who had practiced martial arts since they were young, nor were they martial arts geniuses. Their strength gradually increased because they followed Yang Qindong and were taken care of by him. It's just that this kind of strength was naturally no problem for them to deal with ordinary people, but once they encountered a powerful killer, they seemed a little powerless. This was also the reason why after fighting for a long time, they still couldn't deal with the enemy in front of them, even though they knew that the young master might be in danger. But now it was different. The sound of the explosion was a little too wild. Worried about the safety of the sixth young master, the two burst out, breaking through their own potential and increasing their combat power. If all of this was used on ordinary people, it should be said that they were anxious. When people are anxious, they will have no scruples and their lethality will increase a lot. Originally, they were evenly matched, but now they suddenly burst out, and it was the kind of attack that only killed the enemy and did not defend. Soon the 8 killers that the two were facing fell straight to the ground and died. Of course, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei also had a few more wounds on their bodies. However, the two of them completely ignored it and rushed straight to the command center not far behind them. They wanted to find Yang Qindong. They firmly believed that the young master would be fine. Of course, Yang Qindong would be fine. At the last moment, he entered the big warehouse. It was also the first time he had thought about it. Not only did the warehouse contain hundreds of years of advanced weapons and knowledge, it was also a safe haven. No matter how chaotic the outside world was, this place was as peaceful as ever. After the aftermath of the explosion, Yang Qindong walked out of the big warehouse. He touched the light-colored pentagram on his arm, and couldn't help but feel a myriad of emotions. What kind of fortuitous encounter did he get to own Song? With such a good thing in his hands, shouldn't he do something? Otherwise, wouldn't he be letting down this pentagram and Song's love for him? Young master, young master. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei's voices kept ringing. Yang Qindong suppressed the matter of Song in the bottom of his heart, and walked out with a smile. What are you shouting for? Young master is fine. Look at you. It's better for men not to cry. It doesn't look good. That's right, at this moment, Hu Meng and Second Yang had snot and tears running down their faces. For a grown man to cry like this, it was indeed unsightly. When the two saw that Yang Qindong was fine, they couldn't help but rush over in surprise. They touched the sixth young master's body here and there, as if they were afraid that something was missing. Okay, I'm fine. I hid too far away just now. The explosion didn't hurt us, but the command center, and the sand table was blown away. What a pity. Puffed. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei almost spat out their saliva. At this time, he was still thinking about the loss of the sand table. Their young master was really careless. What a weirdo. Li Min and Shen Kun were dead, and not even their bones were left. After dealing with these two experts, it didn't take long for the first and second guard teams to withdraw. They loyally completed Yang Qindong's arrangement and chased all the way out, killing all the black-clothed assassins they saw. But when they returned to the camp, they couldn't help but blame themselves. The command center was blown up. Fortunately, the sixth young master was fine. Otherwise, they would have to apologize with their lives. Even if Yang Qindong was fine, the two captains, Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao, still came to apologize. In this regard, Yang Qindong did criticize them. See, there will always be someone stronger than you. Your abilities are still lacking. If it weren't for the young master, my strength is not bad. Wouldn't it be dangerous this time? Just you wait. When this is over, you will train hard for me. When the time comes, whoever complains about being tired will have to leave the guard team and serve in the cold front. In the face of Yang Qindong's reprimand, the two captains obeyed and didn't talk back. They knew that the young master was doing this for their own good. After today's incident, they also decided to train harder. In the future, they must not let today's dangerous incident happen again. Below Sangnu City, the mercenaries were cleaning up the battlefield and surrounding the place. After a night of charging and fighting, the Lansong soldiers were defeated. Of the 50,000 Lansong soldiers, 45,000 Fan Yuhai soldiers escaped with Sang Wenla. Less than 10,000 of them escaped into the city. The rest were either killed or captured. Also captured were the 100,000 laborers of Lansong, as well as 20,000 Han civilians and countless military supplies. The harvest from this battle was bountiful. This battle also showed the might of the mercenaries, which could be seen from the morale of the soldiers. When Yang Chendong arrived outside the city, he saw the tired but energetic soldiers. Good. Everyone fought well in this battle. Someone will calculate the military merits later. As for now, everyone should have a good night's rest. We will attack the city tomorrow morning. Yang Chendong's affirmative attitude made all the soldiers who participated in the battle excited and happy. Some of them were already thinking about how to perform well in the battle tomorrow. On the contrary, in Sangmu City, General Sang Wenla was dispirited. He originally thought that he had found the weakness of the mercenaries and saw the hope of victory. But who would have thought that everything would be reversed at night? Not only was the army heavily damaged, they could only wait in the city to be attacked. Tell the brothers to defend the city. We must be confident. In a few days, the king will send reinforcements. At that time, it will be time for us to counterattack. These words also attracted the approval of some of the captains and Kiliarchs. It seemed that the morale of the soldiers had also increased. Only Sang Wenla knew that the Lansong kingdom did not have any reinforcements. In the Battle of Wuha Forest, General La Ti died, and they lost 100,000 soldiers. In the Battle of Hanoi City, General Sai Shi died, and they lost 60,000 to 70,000 soldiers. Last night, they lost another battle and they lost nearly 100,000 soldiers. After consecutive defeats, the military strength of the Lansong kingdom had long been depleted. The 60,000 soldiers in his hands were the main force of the entire army. However, this main force was still surrounded by people, as if they would be eaten up at any time. These mercenaries were too scary. In the midst of trembling, the night finally passed. At dawn the next day, the mercenaries outside Sangnu City gathered and stood quietly outside the city, waiting for the sixth young master to give them the order to attack. Yang Chendong also changed into the golden marshal's uniform and walked over to a high ground outside the city. Victory in war was the result of the joint efforts of the generals and soldiers. In Yang Chendong's view, the strength of an army could be reflected from its external performance. It was roughly divided into 4 classes. The 4th class was a motley crew. They had no military discipline and robbed everywhere without a goal. Such an army would scatter as soon as they were attacked by an organized army. They were definitely not strong. The 3rd class army had a complete organizational structure. Their military formation was neat and uniform, but their fighting spirit was not high. Although they were stronger than the 4th class army, as long as they encountered an enemy with more fighting strength, they would definitely be defeated. They could not be considered strong in this aspect. 2nd class armies not only had a unified command system, but they were also well equipped. Their morale was also high. During the march, they would often shout slogans like, "Kill the enemy and serve the country." The soldiers were extremely brave. This class of army had momentum. They were not afraid of any enemy and could be called a powerful army. However, it was a pity that they were not the strongest. Compared to the strongest army, they still lacked a certain quality. This quality was silence. The strongest army was a silent army. This silence did not mean that the people in the army were mutes or did not speak. The so-called silence referred to a kind of momentum. Although there were tens of thousands of people, there was only one voice, one order, one goal, one step, one decision. In the end, to accomplish something, it would explode with unimaginable power. Lung Feng was the representative of the power of silence. When they moved, they were like thunder, shocking the world. When they were still, they were like statues, motionless and steady. With such an army and the powerful firearms provided by Dachang, there was no reason for them to lose or not win. At this moment, outside Mulberry Rage City, a dense mass of soldiers stood in the valley. They had different appearances, different military ranks, came from different places, and had different preferences, but they were all gathered in the same place, listening to the same voice, looking in the same direction. Not a single sparrow could be heard. This was the true meaning of silence, the most important quality of an army. This was a first-rate army. Such an army was invincible and invincible. In comparison, the army led by Sang Weng-la could not even be considered a second-class army. It was only a third-class army. Coupled with the defeat, the morale of the army had plummeted. There was no longer any possibility of stopping their advance. "I order." Yang Chendong's heroic voice shouted, "Attack." Chapter 585. Boom boom boom. As soon as he finished speaking, the 100mm mortars roared angrily. The shells flew out from the barrels and drew a beautiful arc in the sky as they blasted towards Sangnu City. At the same time, 5 rocket launchers whizzed towards the East City Gate. The seemingly sturdy East City Gate was instantly destroyed, revealing the figures of the Lansong soldiers guarding behind the gate. Charge! The 2 regiments of the Cold Vanguard, the 20 battalions of the auxiliary troops, and the 30,000 Vietnamese mercenaries roared out in unison. Under the earth-shattering artillery barrage, countless brave soldiers charged forward, their momentum shaking the heavens, and no one could stop them. With a plop, he fell onto the city tower. Sang Weng-la's eyes were filled with despair. "It's over, it's all over." Even the general had lost his confidence in victory. The soldiers below were even more intimidated by this momentum. The only thing they could do was to run around like headless flies and throw the weapons in their hands to the ground and surrender. The Lansong Kingdom had already used up all their strength in the Battle of Hanoi City. They had used all the fireproof guns and iron shields that they hurriedly produced. Although they had caused quite a bit of damage to the mercenaries, they had still lost in the end. It was also from that moment onwards that this kingdom was destined to walk down the path of defeat. The East City Gate was breached and countless mercenaries rushed into the city. What made them depressed was that they could not even put up a decent resistance. The city had changed hands and they had won. In the end, the enemy's general, Sang Weng-la, who was surrounded on the East City Tower, had no choice but to surrender with his subordinates. At this time, who would dare to resist the mercenaries? 6th Young Master, Sangnu City has been conquered. Sang Weng-la has surrendered and been captured. In the afternoon, the 2 regimental commanders of Lungfeng came to Yang Chendong to report the results of the battle. A city guarded by 60,000 soldiers only lasted for a few hours before it was breached and wiped out. It was not slow at all. Very good. The 2nd Regiment will stay behind to clean up the battlefield and tally the spoils. The 3rd Regiment will head towards Wanxiang City. Yang Chendong nodded his head in satisfaction. With the surrender and destruction of the Sangwala tribe, the entrance to the Lansong Kingdom was wide open. It was time to go straight to the center of the army. The bicycles were all transferred to the 3rd Regiment. Wu Sheng led the regiment of Cold Front straight to Wanxiang City with a face full of excitement. They would definitely create another glorious era. At this moment, Wanxiang City had yet to receive news of their defeat at the front line. As the capital of the country, it was still bustling with life, giving people the feeling that it was in a flourishing age. Any smart person would be able to feel a shadow looming over them under this flourishing age. It was like a huge beast that could devour people, opening its terrifying mouth at any time. In fact, the person who caused this shadow to appear was the representative of the civil officials, Imperial Preceptor Long Qi. After receiving the 2 million taels of silver from Yunk, Long Qi was already prepared to become a big merchant and live a comfortable life for the rest of his life. Right now, there was only one thing on his mind, which was to destroy the Lansong Kingdom's regime. Only in this way could he become a rich man. If you wanted to do great things, you would always need help. After careful consideration, Long Qi's gaze landed on a person called He Guang. He Guang, the vice-captain of the Lansong Kingdom's royal guards, was a rather capable general. It was because of his impressive abilities that he was not tolerated by others. This attracted the suppression of the captain of the royal guards, Emoda. And this suppression lasted for 10 years. Emoda only relied on the fact that he had an elder sister, who was the king's favorite concubine. Relying on this nepotism, he had always been arrogant. Sometimes, he even dared to offend the imperial preceptor, Long Qi, and nothing happened to him. Perhaps it was because Emoda had enemies everywhere that his ability to not unite with the other officials was valued by King Payasai. After all, as a force to protect his safety, he could not be used by others. Emoda was incomparably arrogant. Working under such a person, he naturally did things carefully. But this was not enough. As the saying goes, if you want to condemn someone, you can always find a reason to do so. In order to prevent others from deliberately making things difficult for him, these subordinates also needed to find some backing. Coincidentally, the person Higuang found was Imperial Preceptor Long Qi. However, this did not mean that Higuang would rely on Long Qi. As the vice-captain, he still had a lot of autonomy. It was just that the relationship between the two sides was very good, and they could help each other on many things. In this kind of environment, it was normal for Long Qi to set his goal on persuading Higuang. After discussing with Yunk, Long Qi was prepared to give it a try. This was why he invited Higuang to his residence with the excuse of inviting him to a banquet. The scale of the banquet was very small. When the tall and valiant Higuang entered the banquet hall, he only saw Imperial Preceptor Long Qi and a stranger. There was not even a servant to serve them. "Ha ha ha, Captain, he is here. Please take a seat. We're just waiting for you." After seeing Higuang appear, Long Qi laughed loudly and stood up, inviting him to sit down. Skylark, on the other hand, remained seated without the slightest intention of getting up. This attracted Higuang's attention and made him ponder deeply. This person was so unfamiliar. What kind of identity did he have to be so arrogant? It seemed like he did not even give face to the Imperial Preceptor. Looking at Long Qi, he did not seem angry at all. This was a little strange. Higuang had been the vice-captain of the King's Guards for so many years, and he was used to enduring. Therefore, when he looked at Yunk sitting there, he only nodded politely as a greeting. Then, he sat down on the prepared chair. After the three of them sat down, Long Qi smiled at Higuang. "General He, the war at the front is going well. What are your thoughts on the battle at Sangnu City?" The hottest topic among the upper echelons of the Lansang Kingdom was the war at the front. Even the commoners on the streets could talk about it. As the vice-captain of the Royal Guards, how could Higuang not know? Therefore, after thinking for a while, he said, "There is General Sang Wenla at the front, and there is also the help of Jiaoji's famous General Fan Yuhai. With His Majesty's full support, victory is just around the corner." Higuang said these words very smoothly, as if he had said these words countless times. Hearing this, Long Qi just smiled. Suddenly, his face became very serious as he asked, "Is this really what the general is thinking?" Higuang did not know why Long Qi would ask such a question. Puzzled, he asked, "But what does the Imperial Preceptor mean?" "Nothing much. I just want to hear the general's thoughts. Speaking of which, there are no outsiders here. Why don't the general be more sincere and say what you want to say?" Long Qi said like a big bad wolf leading a little rabbit to his bowl. "No outsiders, my ass. Not to mention others, just the person sitting at the side. He did not even know his name. How could he not be considered an outsider?" Of course, these were all thoughts in Higuang's heart. He could not say it out loud. Therefore he laughed and said, "But what does the Imperial Preceptor think about this?" Long Qi seemed to have known that Higuang would ask this question. He said with a serious face, "Our army will lose." "Oh, what?" Higuang originally thought that the other party would say some high-sounding words like he did, but he did not expect such an answer. This was completely out of his expectations, and it also made Higuang stunned on the spot. His mouth was wide open, and it seemed like it was more than enough to stuff an egg into it. "What? General He, did you not hear me clearly? The Imperial Preceptor said that our army will lose. It won't be long before the news of our defeat reaches the capital. I'm afraid that at that time, the Lansang Kingdom will not be safe." Long Qi had a compassionate look on his face, as though he was an eminent monk who had attained the Tao. How is this possible? Higuang was really shocked. Although he was the vice-captain of the king's captain and knew the combat power of his own soldiers, they had the advantage in numbers. In addition, they had prepared for a long time. How could they lose so easily? Even if they lost 1 or 2 battles, it would not easily affect the safety of the capital. Also, Long Qi was the imperial preceptor. How could he say something like this that boosted the morale of others and destroyed his own prestige? He Guang could not understand this. Knowing that He Guang wouldn't believe him, Long Qi smiled again. Then he pointed to Yunk, who was sitting there and drinking tea, and said, "Come General He, let me introduce you. This is Special Envoy Yun sent by the Great Ming Dynasty's Duke of Loyalty and Courage." Great Ming Duke of Loyalty and Courage? Mercenary? As if he thought that he did not hear clearly, He Guang looked at Yunk and asked with a face full of doubt. At the same time, his expression was constantly changing. "Yes, the Special Envoy greets General He." Yun Ke finally opened his mouth to speak. He spoke the standard language of the Great Ming Dynasty, but it sounded like a thunderclap in He Guang's mind. What was going on? He actually saw the enemy's special envoy in the Imperial Preceptor's residence. This person did not go to the palace but appeared here. Could it be that he secretly came to contact the Imperial Preceptor? What did the Imperial Preceptor want to do? Betray the country? Thinking of this, He Guang suddenly stood up from the chair and pulled out the sword on his body. Imperial Preceptor, this person appeared here without His Majesty's permission. He must be an enemy spy. Please allow me to take him down. Take him down? Take him to who? Whether it was Long Qi or Skylark, they didn't seem to care about He Guang's intense reaction. It was as if they didn't see the angry atmosphere and just sat there calmly. "Of course it's to His Majesty," He Guang naturally replied. "What happens after you hand it to His Majesty? Are you going to hand me over to His Majesty for punishment?" As he spoke, Long Qi's face became gloomy. In the end, he was the imperial preceptor of a country. Once he was angry, he would be imposing without being angry. At this moment, He Guang was also intimidated by this imposing manner. Then, he suddenly remembered that this was the imperial preceptor's residence. Since Special Envoy Yin could sit there calmly and unhurriedly, it was clear that he had obtained the imperial preceptor's approval. Then, why would he capture someone here? This time, He Guang came alone and did not bring a single subordinate. If the other party turned hostile, would he be able to walk out of the imperial preceptor's residence? Chapter 586. Feeling that he was in danger, in order to protect himself, He Guang raised his sword and said to Long Qi, "State teacher, you must have been deceived, right? Don't worry. I will capture this person now and send him to His Majesty. When the time comes, I will explain the situation to His Majesty and guarantee that state teacher will be fine." At this time, He Guang actually wanted to provoke. When Yunk and Long Qi saw this, they couldn't help but laugh. After a burst of laughter, Long Qi said, "You came to plead for mercy for state teacher. Haha, do you really have that much face? Don't you know that you can't even protect yourself?" "State teacher, what do you mean?" He Guang's face was puzzled. "Wait a minute, put down the sword first. You make people feel uncomfortable looking at you." Without waiting for state teacher to answer the question, Yunk opened his mouth. "Why should I put down the sword just because you told me to?" He Guang looked at Yunk with a sneer. "AI, why do you have to do this?" Yunk shook his head and reached for his waist to take out a pistol with a silencer. After gently unlocking the safety, he casually fired a shot. Pooh! The sound was effectively blocked, but the bullet was not blocked. It flew out of the barrel and hit the sword. At such a close distance, the powerful force made He Guang, who was not prepared, have to let go of the sword. With a clanking sound, the sword fell to the ground, scaring He Guang and making him break out in a cold sweat. He had long heard that the mercenaries had powerful guns, but he never had the chance to see it. Now that he finally saw it, it was indeed powerful. But after a moment of distraction, He Guang wanted to lower his head to pick up the sword, but he saw the carpet under his feet suddenly shake. Another bullet hit his feet. "General He, seeing that you are a hero, I want to have a good talk with you. If you refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit, then I do not mind that the next bullet will hit your body. You will undoubtedly die." Yunk's voice spread in the banquet hall. He Guang's body stood there as if his acupoints were pressed. He did not dare to move an inch. Sure enough, it was a powerful firearm that could fire a second bullet at any time. Did that mean that it could fire a third or fourth bullet? Just as He Guang was pondering over this problem, the voice of State Preceptor Long Qi sounded in his ears. All right, General, he is not an outsider. Come and sit down to talk. He Guang didn't know if the next bullet would hit him, so he might as well sit down and listen to what the other party had to say before making a decision. When he finally sat down, Grand Preceptor Long Qi said to him calmly, General He, you are also a talent of your generation. Don't you know that a great disaster is about to befall you? Please enlighten me, Imperial Tutor. He Guang really didn't understand why he was about to face a disaster. Sigh, once the front line is defeated, what will His Majesty decide? I'm sure he'll use the power of the King's Guards to counterattack. Who do you think is the leader of this group? It couldn't be that idiot Emoda himself, right? His Majesty probably wouldn't allow that. But when a general leads an army, can you guarantee victory? The hundreds of thousands of people in front of you are no match for the mercenaries. What can you do with the few people in your hands? If this isn't a great disaster, then what is? This. He Guang really wanted to deny all of this, but he knew that what the State Preceptor said was true. Emoda's ability was limited, and His Majesty knew this as well. However, considering that this person was still very obedient, it was naturally not bad to raise him as a loyal dog. However, such a dog could not be released to bite people, because he did not have the ability to do so. At that time, it would be inevitable for him, the vice-captain, to lead the army. To lead the army was naturally something that every general hoped to do. However, just as the State Preceptor said, the hundreds of thousands of soldiers in front of him were no match for the mercenaries. How many men could he bring out? The entire King's Guards only had 20,000 people. How could they defeat the mercenaries? If that wasn't courting death, then what was? However, at that time, he would have to do so regardless of whether he was willing or not. If he agreed, he would die on the battlefield. If he didn't agree, he would very likely be taken down by Emoda. No matter what the outcome was, there wouldn't be a good ending. Layers of cold sweat began to flow out of He Guang's head. Previously, he didn't think that the army in front of him would be defeated, so he didn't consider these things. But now that it was pointed out, he realized that the situation was already so dangerous. Of course, the so-called danger would only appear when the army in front of him was completely defeated. If they didn't lose, if it was only a small defeat, then all of what the State Preceptor said wouldn't happen, and he wouldn't be in danger. He Guang was still deep in thought when Skylark, who was sitting there playing with a pistol in his hand, spoke. General He, after the State Preceptor's recommendation, we found that you are indeed a character. Therefore, the Duke of Loyalty said that if you are willing to surrender, he will use you heavily. You know General Hong Jin of Yunnan Province, which is the original Jiaoji country, right? In the past, he was just a deputy general with a low status. However, he was chosen by the Duke of Loyalty and has become the current general of Yunnan Province, leading 30,000 soldiers. If General He is willing, the future General Lan Song will be you. And you can also lead 30,000 soldiers. This way, you won't have to die, and you can also become a real general. Isn't that beautiful? He Guang knew about Hong Jin's matter. Although some people were afraid that he was a traitor, who knew how many people envied him in private. At least because of this person, the Hong family didn't suffer heavy losses. Not only that, but Hong Jin's status also rose. It was said that the Duke of Loyalty gave him an annual salary of 100,000 taels of silver. Who knew how many people envied him? It should be explained here that Yang Chendong implemented a high salary policy to raise honest people. Once someone was appointed, they would enjoy a high annual salary. It was to ensure that the person appointed could live a good life, or at least not have to worry about living. Moreover, once they reached a certain age and needed to retire, they would receive a large monthly salary, which was called a pension. This kind of treatment would only end when the person who was enjoying it died. In other words, once someone was appointed as an official by the Duke of Loyalty, they wouldn't have to worry about food and drink for the rest of their life. Of course, if someone was still dissatisfied and wanted to be corrupt, then sorry, once it was found out, the punishment would be quite severe. There were already clear rules that anyone who was found to be corrupt over 10,000 taels of silver would be killed without mercy. No matter what kind of achievements they had in the past, the result would be the same. The Duke of Loyalty said that merits couldn't offset demerits. After all, they didn't have to worry about food and drink, and even arrange for their old age. If they were still dissatisfied, then they deserved to be killed. Back to the main topic. He Guang was one of the people who envied Hong Jin in private. Not only did he envy Hong Jin's ability to lead troops and become a true general, but he also envied Hong Jin's treatment. For example, he was the vice captain of the King's Guards, and could be considered a fourth-ranked general. However, in reality, his monthly salary was only 80 taels of silver, which was less than 1,000 taels of silver a year. Although it wasn't a problem to support a family, it was just a casual life. He didn't have the ability to do anything else, and even if he wanted to be more comfortable, he couldn't do it. Now that his role model was in front of him, and his treatment was 100 times better than his own, and his power was also much greater. At this moment, it was impossible to say that he wasn't moved at all, although he wasn't a greedy person, or else Yunk wouldn't have talked to him in this way. Who would refuse a better life? At this moment, He Guang became a lot more silent, and had a hesitant appearance. General, he doesn't need to answer so early. How about this? You can go back first and think about it carefully. If the front lines are really defeated and you are sent out as a general, then it won't be too late to make a decision at that time. Yunk didn't seem to be in a hurry to force He Guang to answer, and instead said very generously, "Let me go." He Guang was also shocked at this moment. He didn't agree to anything, and on the contrary, he knew about Yunk's existence. Wasn't the other party afraid that he would sell him out, and come back with troops to capture him? As if he saw through He Guang's thoughts, Yunk laughed and said, "General, he is a smart person. How can you do something stupid? Besides, even if you really hand me over to your king, what benefits will you get? There is still Maud above you, so you won't be able to stand out. On the other hand, if you sell me out, will the loyal guild forgive you? You have to know that we have a lot of these guns in the mercenary army. If we casually use one on someone, I guarantee that you will be completely dead, and no one will even know who did it." After tempting and threatening, Yunk waved his hand. "Okay, General, he can leave." I'm really leaving." Slowly standing up, He Guang decided to leave first. There were some things that he needed to think about carefully. Standing up, He Guang prepared to leave with large strides, but Yunk's voice suddenly sounded behind him, "Wait. Sure enough, he still isn't going to let me go?" He Guang sighed and slowly turned around. "Take your sword with you. Also, don't look like you have lost your soul. Anyone who sees you will have doubts." Yunk pointed at the sword on the ground and said very casually, "Oh." He Guang's heart that had been raised up finally calmed down. He picked up the sword and bowed, then turned around and left. He Guang really left, leaving behind State Teacher Long Qi, who asked with lingering fear, "Special Envoy Yun, he really won't tell on us? Why don't we leave now?" State Teacher, don't worry. As long as he isn't stupid, he won't tell on us. There is no need for us to leave. Does State Teacher really think that I am the only one who came to Wanxiang City?" Yunk laughed very confidently. Chapter 587. The more confident Yunk was, the more confident Long Qi became. He chuckled when he heard what Yunk said. That's right. He wasn't even afraid of Yunk. What was there to be afraid of? If something really happened, he could just say that he was being held hostage. With his status as the state preceptor, there was still a lot of room for negotiation. As Yunk expected, He Guang was a smart person. He didn't choose to report it immediately. Instead, he decided to look at the situation first. Especially when he saw the deep mark made by the bullet on the saber, he didn't have the thought of reporting it. Just as they said, there was no benefit in reporting it. On the contrary, he would be targeted by the mercenaries and be in danger at any time. This kind of life was not what he wanted. 3 days had passed since He Guang left the state preceptor's residence. 3 days later, the latest news finally came. The front army was defeated. General Sang Wenla had no choice but to retreat to Sangnu City and ask the king for reinforcements. As soon as the news reached the capital, it was chaotic. The court was even more chaotic. All the officials looked scared, as if they were worried that Sangnu City would not be able to be defended. If that was the case, wouldn't it mean that the capital would be in danger? Wouldn't it mean that the Lansang kingdom would follow in the footsteps of Jiaoji and be destroyed? It was impossible for others to say that a country would be destroyed. Even in the powerful Ming dynasty, they would only make you submit and would not occupy your territory. This was because in the eyes of the people of the Central Plains, these were all barren lands and did not have much value. However, the mercenaries were not. Their appetite was extremely good. They really did not care about meat and fish. They could really do things that could destroy a country. Under the lead of State Preceptor Long Qi, all the civil officials asked the king to send troops to reinforce Sangnu City. Looking at the same scene below, King Paiyasai felt a headache coming on. Send troops, send troops. He also wanted to send troops, but there had to be troops to send. But now, other than the 20,000 king's guards beside him, there were no extra troops. Even if he went to recruit troops now, it would still take time. Your Majesty, please send troops quickly. No matter what, you can't let the mercenaries pass Sangnu City. Once that happens, the country will be in danger. Long Qi continued to plead on behalf of the officials. Yes, Your Majesty, please send reinforcements quickly. The civil officials below all cooperated and asked in unison. At this point, even Paiyasai could not stop them. Moreover, he knew that if the frontline army was defeated, his 20,000 king's guards would not be of much use. Since that was the case, it was better to support the frontline first. Then they would recruit soldiers from all over the country. Hopefully they would make it in time. All right, this king will immediately send troops. Under the immense pressure, Paiyasai finally made a decision. Of the 20,000 king's guards, only 5,000 remained. The rest were handed over to the vice-captain, hoping that he would be able to help Sangwang and turn the tables around. The army at the front had indeed been defeated, and he had indeed been appointed as the commander of the army. All of this was within the expectations of Special Envoy Yun. The moment He Guang received the military order, he ordered a few of his trusted subordinates to gather the troops while he himself headed straight for the imperial tutor's residence. To the outside world, they were here to ask about the logistics, but in fact, they were here to see the special envoy. The three of them met again. Although it had only been 3 days, many things had changed. At this moment, He Guang was less arrogant and more respectful. Special Envoy Yun, this general is willing to surrender. Please tell me what to do next. Well said, well said. Young smiled and reached into his pocket. This time, he did not take out a flintlock, but a bunch of banknotes. There were banknotes with denominations of 100, 200, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 and 10,000. There were over 100 banknotes, which added up to 500,000. After taking out the banknotes, Young placed them in front of He Guang. General He, take these and bribe all the Kiliarchs, Centurions, Decharches and Decharches. This army will be the foundation for you to establish yourself here in the future. This is all for me. It was the first time He Guang saw so many banknotes, so he looked a little excited. Sorry, there is nothing for you here. These are all for your subordinates. As for you, this is the only one. Skylark chuckled and took out another piece of paper from his bosom. Written on it was 200,000 taels of silver. Handing the banknote to He Guang, Young said, 100,000 is the reward for you joining the Duke of Loyalty. The other 100,000 is your annual salary for the next year. Now take it. People worked first before they were paid, but the Duke of Loyalty paid first before he worked. Speaking of which, the payment was the same, but the feeling it gave was completely different. Holding the gold and silver in his hand, He Guang was really moved at this moment. With a plop, he knelt in front of Young. Special Envoy Yin, thank you for your trust. Don't worry, this general will not let you down. All right, this kneel will wait for the Duke of Loyalty to come. Skylark chuckled. With this kneel, this task could be considered completed. He believed that the 6th young master would definitely praise him. The Duke of Loyalty is coming here? Wasn't I the one who brought people to Sangnu City? He Guang was puzzled and confused. Young and Long Qi looked at each other and smiled. However, no matter how you looked at it, Long Qi's smile was a little forced. It was not his fault. Who would have thought that the army at the front line would be defeated so miserably? When he heard the latest news from Yang, he was shocked. While laughing, Yang said to He Guang, who had already stood up, "General He, you still don't know, right? Sangnu City has already been breached. The Duke of Loyalty is leading the army to Wanxiang City. Not only that, there is already a group of mercenaries lying in ambush outside the city. They will work together with General He to solve the problem inside Wanxiang City. The time is set for tonight. At that time, General He will be in charge of opening the North Gate. There shouldn't be any problems, right?" Ah. It was indeed the first time He Guang heard this news. He was really shocked. He did not expect that the moment the news of Sangnu City being besieged, the city had already been breached. What was even more unbelievable was that the mercenaries had already arrived at the city without him knowing. At this moment, his legs trembled and he almost knelt on the ground. Yang did not take He Guang's reaction to heart and continued, "General, he only needs to control the palace and the residences of the ministers. The matter of taking down the treasury, armory, and granary will naturally be done by the mercenaries. Do you understand?" "Understood, this general understands." He Guang, who originally had a trace of arrogance, became completely obedient at this moment. He originally thought that the other party would rely on him. Only now did he know that even if he did not make a move, Wanxiang City would still be breached. It was just a matter of time. "State teacher, I also need your cooperation this time." Yang turned his head and looked at Long Qi with a smile. Long Qi reached out to stroke his beard and nodded while laughing. "Well said, well said. I will hold a banquet tonight and gather all the ministers in the city. That would be great." Yang knew that Long Qi understood his meaning and smiled reservedly. With this plan completed, all that was left was to wait for night to arrive. Half an hour later, He Guang left the imperial advisor's residence. He announced to the public that he had received the full support of the imperial advisor, and that the rations were no longer a problem. He then gathered all the subordinates under him for a meeting to discuss matters. At the same time, many carriages walked out of the state teacher's residence. These servants went to the various ministers' residences in the city to send out invitations. It was said that all the civil officials were gathered to contribute to the army that was about to depart. At the same time, they had to pray for the blessings of the gods. For such an important matter related to the fate of the country, all the ministers who received the invitations did not dare to disobey, regardless of whether or not they were on good terms with the state teacher. If they did not show up now, they would easily attract hatred. It was just for show. They all said that they would definitely attend the banquet on time. Even when the news reached the palace, King Piaci had a gratified expression and sighed when he heard the news. He was very gratified that his ministers could unite at such a crucial time. He seemed to have seen the scene of them defeating the mercenaries while united. He Guang knows how to curry favor and knows the importance of food. Guard Captain Maud, who also received the news, had a look of disdain. However, he did not think too deeply about it. Instead, he decided to attend the banquet at the state teacher's residence at night after a bout of jealousy. No matter what, he could not let He Guang monopolize the limelight. He had to think of a way to build a good relationship with the state teacher. If possible, he could even obstruct He Guang's supply of logistics. From this, it could be seen how terrifying internal strife was. Everything was proceeding in an orderly manner. No one expected that danger would descend upon them soon. The capital of the country, Wanxiang City, was about to be taken over. Moreover, after He Guang returned to the military camp, he gathered all the officers under him. Then he got his personal guards to seal off the entire venue, and began to spend money to buy people's hearts. Not all soldiers valued money, especially those who were part of the king's guard. There were still some who could adhere to their principles. Once he encountered people who did not want benefits and even cursed, He Guang would not be polite. With just a glance, his personal guards rushed up and killed those who did not know what was good for them on the spot. After killing more than 10 people, the smell of blood was extremely pungent. Only then was this wave of resistance suppressed. When everyone saw that resistance was a dead end, and that surrendering would not only allow them to live, but also receive money. Many people wavered and signed the oath. Once they signed, it would be difficult for them to go back on their words. He Guang had said that he would announce this agreement to the world later. If anyone still had second thoughts, they would be in trouble, and might even be assassinated by the mercenaries in the future. Chapter 588. Originally, some people were still half-heartedly thinking that once they were free, they would pass on the message. But now they hesitated. Was it worth it to risk their lives for a dynasty that was about to be destroyed? There was no fame, no benefits, no benefits. It was not worth it to risk their lives for a loyalty that they did not know if the king would believe. Not to mention offending the mercenaries, no place in the world would be safe. After settling the army, He Guang finally relaxed and started to plan every step of the night. The sky slowly darkened. Wanxiang City did not have a curfew, so at this time, lanterns were hung up everywhere, making it seem very lively and bustling. Especially at the imperial tutor's residence tonight, it was full of guests. Carriages arrived one after another, and the sound of greetings could be heard. Imperial tutor Long Qi was personally welcoming the guests at the door, giving them enough face, making everyone's face even more radiant. Looking at everyone, who had a face that showed concern for the country and its people. After waiting for more than 2 hours and not seeing any guests, Long Qi patted his back and said to the housekeeper behind him with a tired look, "You can close the door now. Without orders, no one is allowed to enter and no one is allowed to leave." "Master, don't worry, I know what to do." The butler nodded. This old man who had followed the imperial tutor for decades naturally knew what to do, and even knew what might happen next. The ministers were surrounded, and the army camp also started to move. The first step was to surround the 5,000 king's guards that had not been assigned to them. Fortunately, their guard captain Mo Da had already gone to the imperial tutor's residence for the banquet. Without a leader, it was not very troublesome to deal with them. The second step was to surround the palace, and no one was allowed to enter or leave without orders. This was equivalent to cutting off the connection between the king and others. The third step was to open the city gates and let the mercenaries outside the city in. The first step of the plan was to surround the camp of the king's guards with 8,000 soldiers. Then, under the protection of a group of personal guards, He Guang walked into the camp with the emperor's fake decree in his hand, and said that these 5,000 soldiers would also be under his leadership. Many of these 5,000 people were Mo Da's trusted aides. When they saw that their master did not appear, they felt that something was wrong. Some of them were bold enough to look at the Wang Yu in He Guang's hands to determine if it was true or false. With your status, what right do you have to see Wang Yu? I think you're clearly using this opportunity to rebel. Guards, take him down. He Guang would not reason with anyone. With the military power in hand, he only needed to rely on his own strength to push through. A group of personal guards swarmed forward. Anyone who refused to comply would be killed. Blood flowed like a river. After the heads of dozens of people were separated from their bodies, the others finally became obedient and knelt on the ground in submission. With the matter of the barracks settled, the next step was to seal off the palace. There were still 500 king's guards left here. Usually, all of them had their noses in the air, and it was very difficult for them to put other people in their eyes. At this moment, when they saw that someone had actually surrounded them, which one of them wasn't anxious to the point of stomping their feet? Some of the more irritable ones even brandished their swords and rushed out, looking as if they wanted to teach the other party a lesson. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Waves of arrows flew over, and the ground was filled with corpses. This also intimidated these arrogant people. When they knew that the other party was serious, they retreated step by step until they reached the front of His Majesty's palace. Only then did they stop with nowhere to go. When the news reached his ears, Piusai was really shocked. He never thought that General He Guang, whom he had taken a fancy to, would actually have thoughts of rebellion. Usually this person looked very reliable. As the king of a country, he also had his own pride. Before the matter was finalized, he still wanted to work hard. Thus, under the protection of a few guards, he wanted to go out and see He Guang. As soon as he walked out, Waves of arrows rained down and stopped about 20 feet in front of them. They were not targets, but just deterred. However, this was enough. Piasai's legs went soft. If it weren't for the guards beside him supporting him, he was afraid that he would have fallen to the ground. He was also a king, but he was not like Lily, who had fought his way out of life and death situations. He had inherited the throne. When had he ever seen such a scene of shouting and killing? Quick, retreat. Retreat. Send a signal for help. Piasai did not know what the situation outside was like, but the only thing he could do now was to ask for help. Soon, a dazzling and colorful firework rose into the sky from the palace. That was the king's signal for help. The firework rose into the air, illuminating the sky and making it much brighter. The Grand Preceptor's residence, which was not far from the palace, could naturally see it clearly. When some of the officials discovered this signal, they were all shocked. The captain of the king's guards, Maud, immediately stood up and wanted to rush out of the Grand Preceptor's residence. General Maud, what do you mean by this? The Grand Preceptor's banquet is not over yet. Why are you in such a hurry? Long Qi sat on the high seat, drinking the wine in his cup as he spoke slowly. Lord Grand Preceptor, you saw it. His Majesty sent a signal for help. There must be some thieves causing trouble. I want to go back and protect him. Maud hadn't thought that this matter would have anything to do with the Grand Preceptor. After all, this was an important minister. If anything happened to the king, it wouldn't be good for him. After cupping his fists and saying all this, Maud turned around and was about to leave with his 4 personal guards. However, a dozen or so guards from the Grand Preceptor's residence appeared in front of him. They all stood with their swords and blocked Maud's path. Grand Preceptor, what are you doing? He still hadn't reacted. Instead, he asked with a puzzled expression. From this point of view, this Maud had indeed relied on his connections to get to the top. His ability to adapt was too weak. He was no different from an idiot. Without directly answering Maud's question, Long Qi only looked up at the sky, then smiled and said, "The Grand Preceptor doesn't think that's a signal for help. It must be a child's trick." What? How is that possible? This time, there was no need for Maud to say anything. The other ministers all looked at Long Qi with bewildered gazes. Anyone could tell how intense the firework explosion was. Other than the royal family, no one else could use it. Even if they had money, they couldn't buy it. However, the Grand Preceptor said that it was a child's trick. What did he mean by that? Some of the quick-witted people's expressions changed drastically. They thought to themselves, could it be that the Grand Preceptor was going to rebel? Could it be that he wanted to take the opportunity to rise to the top? Or had he already joined the mercenaries? If it was the former, it would be better. No matter what, they were still ministers. Whoever became the emperor would need the help of their ministers. Just by being able to come to the Grand Preceptor's residence today, their status in the future would not be too low. But what if it was the latter? Once the mercenaries took control of this place, what else could they do? That was not changing the royal family, but changing the dynasty. A great purge was unavoidable. Could they still be as high and mighty as before? More and more people thought of what might happen, and more people looked at Long Qi with a different gaze. At this moment, Maud finally understood. He suddenly pointed his finger at Long Qi and said, You actually want to rebel? Nonsense. Which eye of yours saw the Grand Preceptor rebelling? Long Qi snorted angrily. Although he controlled the entire scene, he didn't want to cause any more trouble before the mercenaries arrived. Of course, he wouldn't admit that he was rebelling. Seeing that Long Qi was still pretending at this time, Maud was also very angry. He pointed his finger and said, All right, if you're not rebelling, then do you dare to let this general out? Maud had already thought it through. No matter what the Grand Preceptor's actions were, he would definitely mobilize an army to annihilate the Grand Preceptor's residence this time. In any case, this person had already walked together with He Guang, so he was his enemy. He would rather kill the wrong person than let him go. How could this little thought be hidden from Long Qi's eyes? To be able to become the Grand Preceptor, his IQ was definitely extremely high. He chuckled. Right now, this is a banquet held by the Grand Preceptor. The purpose of this banquet is to solve the various difficulties of the general at the front. Right now, we haven't even talked about the proper matters, so no one is allowed to leave. After casually finding a reason, Long Qi returned to his seat. In any case, this place was already under his control. It was impossible for Maud and his 4 personal guards to kill their way out. Come, everyone drink. Don't let such a small matter affect everyone's elegance. As he spoke, Long Qi really raised his cup to everyone. At this moment, he had no choice but to lower his head under the eaves. After a moment of hesitation, the other ministers raised their cups one after another. In their opinion, no matter what the outcome was, falling out with the Grand Preceptor now would not result in a good outcome. Didn't you see that more and more soldiers were appearing in the surroundings? Each of them held a large blade in their hands, and had a fierce look on their faces. It was as if they would fight and take someone's life at the slightest disagreement. In order to stabilize these officials, he didn't want them to cause trouble. Long Qi had specially borrowed 500 soldiers from Higuang. With these 500 people, it was enough to stabilize the situation here. Maud was still angry in his heart, especially when he saw that the soldiers who appeared were actually from the king's guard. Long Qi's heart was as clear as day. However, it was precisely because of the appearance of these people that he had no choice but to cower. This was because what he saw in the eyes of these soldiers was not the reverence of seeing their general. Instead, their faces were filled with killing intent. Relying on nepotism to get to the top, it was naturally easy for Mo to use his connections to intimidate others. He could even act out his true colors. However, if one were to talk about fighting to the death, then he did not have the guts to do so. Chapter 589. In the end, Maud obediently returned to his seat and sat down. Since even he lowered his head, the other ministers did not dare to provoke him. They all forced a smile and acted as if they did not see the changes in their surroundings. This was exactly what Long Qi wanted. He chuckled and continued to chat with everyone, but he did not mention anything about the issue of providing security for the soldiers. Fortunately, everyone could see that this was to imprison them. Since that was the case, as long as they behaved themselves, they should be able to keep their lives. At the North City Gate, the torches outside circled 3 times, and the torches on the city tower circled twice before the gates opened. The 3 regiments of the Lung Feng Battalion suddenly appeared like ghosts in the night, and entered the city through the open city gate. With a high-speed bicycle, Wu Sheng brought the 3 regiments to the outskirts of Wanxiang City in the morning. They even had a chance to catch up on sleep and eat before entering the city energetically. The 3 regiments of more than 1,000 soldiers were like a silent giant dragon. Other than the sound of their orderly footsteps, there was no other movement. Just this aura alone was enough to scare many of the Lansong soldiers. As they walked, the 3 regiments divided their soldiers. For example, they left a platoon of soldiers behind at the East City Gate that they were allowed to enter. The creed of the Lung Feng Battalion was that they could trust their officers and comrades, but they would not easily trust others. For places like the city gate that could be attacked or retreated, it was better to leave their own people behind to make them feel more at ease. Political Commissar Chen, I will have to trouble you to make a trip to the Grand Tutor's residence and settle the matters there. 3rd Battalion Commander, you are in charge of taking over the treasury, armory, and granary in the city. There must not be any accidents. Wu Sheng walked forward with large strides while giving orders to the political commissar, and 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo, and 3rd Battalion Commander Chang Chun. This was originally a plan that had been discussed outside the city. The 2 battalion commanders naturally agreed and nodded before starting their own operations. As the regiment commander, Wu Sheng led his men straight to the palace. The moment they entered the city, the agents of the Security Bureau rushed over to lead the way. As long as the target was pointed out, there would not be any mistakes. In the king's bedroom deep in the palace, Pai Yisai was pacing back and forth anxiously. The distress signal had already been sent out, but until now, no one had come to protect him. Could it be that the situation had changed? Could it be that he was already alone? Reporting to your majesty, there's another group of people outside. Just as Pai Yisai was feeling anxious, A guard walked in and knelt on the ground. Haha, reinforcements have finally arrived? Tell everyone to get ready. Once there's a chance, we'll attack from both inside and outside. He thought that his reinforcements had finally arrived. At this moment, he was full of confidence. The greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. This time, Panacea was destined to be disappointed. Although there were people coming, they were not his reinforcements. They were Zheng Chang's enemy, the commander of the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front, Wu Sheng. He Guang was guarding this place. After all, this place was of great importance. After knowing that the mercenaries had finally arrived, he tidied up his uniform and went to greet them. You are He Guang? Wu Sheng walked up to a general in armor and asked in a condescending manner. Yes, I am He Guang. He did not know why, but when he saw Wu Sheng, he felt a strong sense of oppression. There was even a murderous aura coming straight at him. This was a natural result of killing too many people on the battlefield. It was not something that He Guang, who had always stayed in the palace, could compare to. You've done well. Let me introduce myself. I'm the commander of the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front, Wu Sheng. You can call me Commander Wu. Oh right, how's the situation? He continued to ask as he walked, but his eyes were observing the surroundings intentionally or unintentionally. Although the Security Bureau's intelligence said that He Guang was trustworthy, before the overall situation was settled, he should not let his guard down. When he heard that the other party was the commander of the Cold Front, He Guang immediately felt his aura weaken. In the past few days, he had learned about the mercenaries from various sources. He also knew that the Cold Front was the most powerful force among the mercenaries. Now that a commander had appeared, how could he not be nervous? Commander Wu, Your Majesty, no? Pasha is in the front yard of the palace. He still has a few hundred guards under him. Their skills and combat strength are not bad. He Guang gave a simple introduction of the situation. However, when Wu Sheng heard this, he did not think much of it. Their combat strength is not bad. Then I would like to see their strength. Come, where is the commander of the 4th Company? I'll give you 2 incense sticks time to beat them into submission. If you can't complete the mission, you're not allowed to eat meat for a week. Yes. As soon as he shouted, a loud voice answered. Then, a team of 100 people separated from the main force and approached the palace. Oh right, the 4th Company is the lowest company of the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front. It's not the strongest. Wu Sheng said casually when he saw the 4th Company respond. This was a low-key show-off. However, He Guang still could not understand the meaning of this sentence. After all, the 4th Company had not shown their prowess yet. In his eyes, whether they were the strongest or not was not clear. However, it was only when the real battle began that he understood. Especially in the dark night, when he saw the flying flames and deafening gunshots. Most importantly, the scene of people falling to the ground in the depths of the palace shocked him completely. With He Guang's strength, it would not be too difficult for him to eliminate these 500 people, but it would not be so easy. How was this a battle? It was a massacre. Every time a gunshot rang out, there would always be people falling to the ground. It was as if a spell had been cast on them. It was incomparably accurate. Although it was said to take 2 incense sticks time, in just 1 incense stick's time, the king's bedroom was hung with a white flag. There was no other way. In just a short while more than 200 people had died. They did not even see the enemy's appearance. How were they going to fight this battle? This was clearly not a battle, but a waiting for death. He Guang's face was filled with shock. He wondered what would happen if he were to be the one leading the army. Wu Sheng had said that this wasn't their strongest attack. Wu Sheng had said that this wasn't their strongest attack. He Guang's face was filled with shock. He wondered what would happen if he were the one leading the army. It seemed that no matter how he thought about it, he could not change the outcome of being slaughtered. He Guang's expression changed drastically. All of this was seen by Wu Sheng from the corner of his eyes. He could not help but laugh. He had already learned from the Security Bureau that this He Guang would become a general like Hong Jin. If he did not beat him up once and for all and subdue him, it was inevitable that some unexpected problems would occur in the future. Presumably, after experiencing what happened today, He Guang would have to think carefully about any thoughts he had. The white flag was hung high, and the gunshot stopped. Then, King Payasai walked out under the protection of a group of guards. Let's go. Let's welcome the surrendered king. Hee, this is not the first time we welcome a surrendered king. Of course, it won't be the last. Wu Sheng's heroic voice rang in everyone's ears. Naturally, the cold vanguard soldiers all puffed out their chests and looked proud. He Guang and the others' eyes were also shining. This was a real army, the strongest army. Now they were on the same side. Just thinking about it made them excited. The Grand Preceptor's residence. The banquet was still going on, and it seemed to be very lively. There was no other way. They were already surrounded, and their lives were already in the hands of others. If they did not drink now, when would they? Of course, no one would be stupid enough to really get drunk. After all, to them, drinking at this time was also a kind of mission, or even an act. Ba ba ba. Ba ba ba. Suddenly, concentrated gunshots came from the streets outside the mansion. It was the sound of the 3rd Battalion attacking the treasury, the armory, and the granary. As soon as the gunshots rang out, the banquet hall naturally heard it. Some people could no longer sit still. There was no movement. He could still pretend to be an ostrich and pretend that he did not know anything. However, gunshots rang out. How could he pretend? Emoda suddenly stood up. Because his movements were too big, he actually knocked the pot of wine in front of him to the ground. However, he did not feel it at all. Instead, he looked at Long Qi and said, "Lord Imperial Preceptor, are children still playing now? Oh, maybe they're the ones setting off firecrackers." Hearing the gunshots, Long Qi knew that the mercenaries had entered the city. At this moment, Long Qi's heart calmed down. When he looked at Emoda, he was naturally even more fearless. You're bullshitting." Long Qi's ability to lie with his eyes wide open infuriated Emoda. He could no longer hold it in and started cursing loudly. "Bastard. Emoda, clean your mouth. Otherwise, I don't mind sealing your mouth." What kind of status did Long Qi have? At this moment, victory was in his grasp. How could he be afraid of the other party's threats and intimidation? "You dare." Knowing that there was no way out, Emoda also showed his ferocity. He did not flare up just now because he also held on to a sliver of hope. That was, without him appearing, the king would be able to solve the problem. But now, even gunshots could be heard outside. It was obvious that his hope had turned into a dream. At this moment, he had to rely on himself. Emoda, who had no way out, decided to show his might and rush out. However, he definitely couldn't beat the guards outside, so he set his target on Long Qi. If he could capture this person alive, perhaps he would have a chance to escape. Protect the Imperial Preceptor. The 6 guards nearby saw that something was wrong with Emoda's mood. After shouting, they drew their swords and rushed forward. At this moment, Emoda also rushed over with 4 guards. In an instant they started fighting, and the banquet became incomparably chaotic. Chapter 590. Clang, clang, clang. 5 against 6, they were actually locked in a stalemate. There was even one time when Emoda's broadsword almost slashed Long Qi's body, causing him to retreat and shout, "Someone stop this madman." There was no need for Long Qi to say anything. A group of soldiers from afar had already rushed over and surrounded Emoda's group of 5. They looked like they would not be able to escape even if they had wings. Seeing that more and more soldiers were surrounding him, Emoda's expression became even more unsightly. Knowing that if this continued, he would definitely die here today. He looked at the ministers who had come to attend the banquet and suddenly shouted, "What are you all doing? Can't you see that Long Qi is rebelling? Do you know that it's a felony to not report what you know? Let's not talk about whether he has already given you any benefits. If you fail, have you thought about the consequences?" Emoda's shout was like a thunderclap that struck the ministers. That's right, the Imperial Advisor's rebellion had already become a fact. But what were they? Which side were they on? Did they agree to rebel? They didn't do that? No one even promised them any benefits. Immediately, many of the ministers stood up and looked at the Imperial Advisor Long Qi, clearly wanting an explanation. Of course, the ministers who could come here would not be alone. They would usually bring 2 guards with them. There were about 50 to 60 officials here, and there were more than 100 guards around them. Moreover, those who could follow their masters were generally experts. As soon as they stood up, the servants who had long heard the commotion and ran over to watch the show became nervous. Some of them even reached out to touch their waists, looking as if they would attack at any time. With so many ministers standing up, Long Qi instinctively stood up and retreated. Although it was true that this was his residence and he had made some arrangements, most of the soldiers were in charge of the periphery. The guards around him were not very strong. Other than the few people who had fought with Emoda, there were only 2 guards left. Relying on these 2 people to face the attacks of dozens of ministers, Long Qi did not have such a big heart and good mentality. Long Qi kept retreating, showing his inadequacy. The other ministers saw that there was an opportunity to take advantage of and immediately stepped forward step by step. Some of the more straightforward ones had already shouted, "Long Qi, what are you doing? Were they really going to rebel? But what benefits did the mercenaries give you? Can you share it with us?" This was a question and a request for benefits. Obviously, everyone wanted to hear what the Grand Preceptor would say and what kind of conditions he would offer. Only then would they be able to weigh the benefits and make a decision. Facing the questioning of the ministers, Long Qi had a bitter look on his face. He opened his mouth and closed it again. This time, the ministers were gathered because they didn't want them to disrupt the mercenaries' plan to enter the city and take control of the situation. As for the benefits, there really wasn't anything. Although he would receive 5 million taels of silver from the Duke of Loyalty, that was his own fault. He couldn't take it out and share it with everyone. Furthermore, 5 million taels of silver may seem like a lot, but if these people were to be divided, then how much would be left in his hands? Almost no one was willing to spit out the fat meat that was already in their mouth. Naturally, Long Qi wouldn't either. He retreated while looking at the side door behind him, wondering if he could slip away from there. After all, the mercenaries should be here soon. As long as he waited for a while, the situation would be settled. Watch him, don't let him escape. Someone saw the side door behind Long Qi and immediately shouted. Then, a few younger officials ran towards the side door, cutting off Long Qi's escape route. Seeing that his thoughts were seen through, Long Qi cursed inwardly. However, because he was older, his speed was limited. It was obviously too late for him to escape. Just as everyone was about to surround Long Qi and demand for an explanation, or even openly ask for benefits, a person suddenly walked out from the side door. He was dressed in Han Chinese clothing. He wasn't very tall and looked very ordinary. However, his eyes were too bright. Anyone who saw them would have an unforgettable feeling. The person who came was the 3rd leader of the Security Bureau's Foreign Affairs Department, Yun Quebec. He originally didn't want to come out. After all, the fewer people who knew about his identity, the better. However, he didn't expect that the club like Ma to be so scheming. He knew to use everyone's strength to pressure Long Qi. Seeing that the state preceptor was about to be in danger, he had no choice but to stand out. Otherwise, if Long Qi died here, even if he didn't do it, it was inevitable that people would have such thoughts. This wouldn't be good for them to persuade the ministers of other countries in the future. For the future, for the sake of the overall situation, Yun Ke took the initiative to stand out. As soon as he came out, he narrowed his eyes and looked at the ministers of the Landsong Kingdom standing in front of him. Even though he was squinting his eyes, he still gave people a very dangerous feeling. He was like a viper hibernating in the grass, as if he would jump out and hurt people at any time. This feeling made the young courtiers involuntarily step back. "What are you doing? What benefits do you want? Why don't you tell me?" Since he had already walked out, Yun Ke naturally wanted to have the right to speak. Thus, as he spoke, he found the nearest chair and sat down. Then he played with a small 77 pistol in his hand. Although Skylark had undergone special training when he entered the Security Bureau, he was not arrogant enough to think that he could fight against a group of people. After all, there were dozens of them. As the saying goes, a gentleman doesn't stand under a dangerous wall. He took out the pistol to protect himself. Of course, it could also be used to intimidate the other party. Who are you? Skylark appeared in front of everyone as if they were nothing and exuded a murderous aura. These ministers couldn't understand him, so they asked hesitantly. Originally, he thought that he was in danger, but he didn't expect Yun-Kei to take the initiative to come out. While Long-Chi was grateful, his expression also became complacent. You asked who he is? After knowing, don't be scared out of your wits. He is the special envoy sent by the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Special envoy? Listening to Long-Chi's introduction, the ministers looked at each other. Then, everyone had a look of understanding. It seemed that the state preceptor was indeed in cahoots with the mercenaries. Just now it was just a guess. Now it could be confirmed. This wasn't beyond everyone's expectations. Now everyone was more concerned about what kind of power this Mr. Special Envoy had. Could it bring them benefits? So soon, these ministers quieted down. Then one of them asked, so it's Mr. Special Envoy. But I don't know what kind of benefits you gave the state preceptor to make him work so hard for the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. This was originally a test. Even if Yun-Kei didn't answer them, these people couldn't say anything. However, in order to stall for time, Yun-Kei decided to answer this question. Do you want to know that much? Well then this special envoy will tell you. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage gave the state preceptor 5 million taels of silver. I don't know if this is enough. What? 5 million taels? It's actually so much. If I were the state preceptor, I'm afraid I wouldn't refuse. Yes. If it was given to me, I'm afraid I won't be able to spend it all in my lifetime. It must be enough. Hearing Yun-Kei's answer, the ministers immediately boiled up. Some of them even completely disregarded their image and unreservedly expressed their envy for the state preceptor. There were even some who directly said that it was enough. Those people couldn't wait to be chosen by the special envoy. Everyone was talking at once. This delayed for a while. Finally, a slightly older and highly respected minister coughed lightly. What are you all doing? Have you all forgotten your own identity? Ah. This reprimand immediately made many of the ministers' faces turn hot. However, this embarrassment only lasted for a moment. In front of benefits who would retreat. What was unexpected was that the elder who reprimanded them just now suddenly changed his tone. Mr. Special Envoy, in fact, we can also help the mercenaries. But I don't know what kind of benefits you can give us. Hearing this, Skylark almost spat out the tea she had just drunk. He had seen shameless people before, but he had never seen such shameless people. From this point, it could be seen that the treatment of the Lansong Kingdom's ministers wasn't good. In fact, not only the Lansong Kingdom, but even the Jiaoji Kingdom and the Great Ming Dynasty's ministers weren't treated well. Especially the Great Ming Dynasty. Starting from the time of Zhu Yuanzhang, the treatment and salary of the ministers wasn't high. Thus, in the early days of the Great Ming Dynasty, a large number of corrupt officials appeared. At that time, they couldn't even kill all of them. There was also a very strange thing. That was, the number of people who passed the imperial examinations reached 364. However, in the second year, the number of corrupt officials who were punished also reached 364. In other words, the previous year's imperial examinations all became corrupt officials. This wasn't to say that people were greedy. It was because the salary was too low. It was so low that all the officials couldn't support themselves and their subordinates. Even if they knew the possible consequences of corruption, they still had to do it. In the end, the officials in the early days of the Ming Dynasty were actually not enough. All of this changed in the hands of the other Great Ming Dynasty's emperors. But even so, the salary was only enough to live on. Without outside wealth, it was impossible to rely on the salary to make a fortune. In comparison, Yang Chendong was much more generous. The salary that he gave the officials was enough to support their families. It wasn't a problem for them to live a wealthy life. Of course, the anti-corruption aspect was also very strict. I've already given you such good treatment and given you so much power, but you still want more. I'm sorry, but I can only take down greedy people like you and replace you with someone else. Chapter 591. Speaking of which, The ministers of the Lansong kingdom looked at Yunk expectantly. Their greedy faces were all exposed. Yunk looked at those greedy faces and wanted to ask, "Do you all have any shame?" But he didn't say it out loud. He only shook his head. "No need, we don't need anyone else's help. Wanxiang City already belongs to the mercenary army. So you don't have the silver, but if you cooperate well, you can still save your lives." Their expectant faces only got them to save their lives. Everyone was instantly unhappy. What was the meaning of this? We are the ministers of the Lansong kingdom, and have a lot of power in our hands. Even if we can't get 5 million silver taels like the imperial tutor, who became the commander of the ministers, we should still be worth 1,000,000 or a few 100,000 silver taels. Now we aren't even given a single silver tael, and only said that we can save our lives. Do you really think that we are weak? Do you really think that we can't do anything if we work together? The angry ministers all had ugly expressions. Some of them not only showed their dissatisfaction on their faces, but they also used their actions to get closer to Yunk. They wanted to capture this envoy and hand him over to His Majesty to receive a reward. At the very least, they could capture him and trade with the mercenary army for a large sum of silver taels. Yunk already expected that these ministers would turn hostile at any time. A cold and murderous aura flashed across his eyes and he raised his gun. One of the officials who was walking at the front was immediately shot. Blood splashed out from his chest, and then more and more blood flowed out. Finally, he was forced to the point where he lost all strength and fell to the ground with a plop. Without warning, a gunshot rang out, frightening the courtiers who were moving forward. Out of instinct, they stopped moving forward and looked at Skylark and the black pistol in his hand with a dazed expression. With their knowledge, they naturally knew that it should be a gun. But it was the first time they saw such a small gun. Especially since the power of this gun wasn't small. One shot could be fatal. While everyone was still in a daze, Yunk had already opened her mouth and said, "I didn't want to deal with you. It was you who wanted to harm me. This is called self-defense, you know? Of course, I still have 50 bullets in this pistol. Now that I've killed one person, I can still kill 49 people. If anyone wants to die, you can come forward and give it a try." It was obviously a lie. The Type 77 pistol only had a capacity of 7 rounds, but Skylark was lying through his teeth, saying that it had a capacity of 50 rounds, and was not afraid of being exposed. Not for any other reason, but because he understood people's psychology too well. Everyone was afraid of death, and no one wanted to die. This made it impossible for his lie to be exposed. Sure enough, when they heard that the pistol could fire 50 bullets at once, the faces of the officials changed drastically. Although this was somewhat beyond their understanding, and in their imagination, the flintlock had to be reloaded after firing a shot, but looking at Skylark's confident expression, no one really dared to try it. It didn't matter if no one tried it, but there were always people who reacted quickly. Usually, these people wouldn't rush to the front of everything. So in order to see if what Skylark said was true, a smart official who still wanted to control the other side said, "Don't listen to his nonsense. How can there be such a powerful gun in the world? Come, let's go together and see what he's going to do." As he spoke, he pushed the waist of one of his colleagues who was caught off guard. That person was caught off guard and rushed forward. Bang! Another gunshot sounded, and that person fell to the ground. He didn't immediately die, but he didn't look at Skylark sitting there. Instead, he looked back and wanted to see who pushed him. He wanted to F***ck this person's 8 generations of ancestors. Sure enough, it can fire continuously. There were still some officials who reacted a bit slower. They didn't pay attention to how someone had the guts to test the gun. They only saw that the gun was indeed not reloaded before it fired a second shot. "I don't believe he can really fire 50 shots. It was still that person who spoke, and then he pushed the other 2 officials beside him. Bang bang. A series of gunshots sounded, and another 2 people fell to the ground. It was only a dozen meters away, so Skylark didn't need to aim at all. He only needed to shoot based on his intuition, and he could hit the target. It really is a good gun. Hey, no, those 2 people just now seem to have been pushed by someone. The officials finally reacted and finally felt that something was wrong. Immediately, they turned around and looked, and then one by one, they put up a defensive look. 3 scapegoats had already been pushed out, and no one could guarantee that they wouldn't be the next one. For safety reasons, of course, it was better to stay as far away from others as possible. For people had already died, and everyone had a clearer understanding of the gun in Skylark's hand. Really, no one dared to try it, so the smart people couldn't find scapegoats even if they wanted to. At this moment, the situation was deadlocked. Haha, it's so lively. A series of dense footsteps entered everyone's ears, and then a group of soldiers in military green camouflage clothes poured into the Grand Tutor's residence in rows. The one who spoke first was a young man who seemed to have a somewhat scholarly temperament. As these soldiers entered, the Lansong soldiers who were originally responsible for the safety of the Grand Tutor's residence all nervously retreated. Naturally, they had already received the notice that the mercenaries would be coming, but when they really faced them, a strong sense of pressure arose, causing them to have no choice but to retreat. Mercenaries. Is he the loyal duke? When the cold vanguard entered the courtyard, it naturally attracted everyone's attention. Then someone shouted, and then everyone looked at the leader, 2nd Battalion Commander Chunbo, with astonishment. Because of the lack of information, not many people in the Lansong Kingdom had seen Yang Chendong before. Unfortunately, some people were lucky enough to see him, but they didn't come back, and this made him a legend. He was young, and he used to be a scholar. This was the most direct impression of him. Chunbo was very young, and he had a scholarly temperament, so it was no wonder that everyone had such an impression of him and mistook him for the Ming Dynasty's loyal duke. Originally, when he heard someone shouting the loyal duke's name, Chunbo was also startled, thinking that the 6th young master had come here first. However, when he thought about it carefully, he realized that it was impossible. There was no need for him to take such a risk. When he saw that everyone's gaze was focused on him, he immediately smiled and said, "Everyone, the battalion commander, Chunbo, is much younger than me." "What? How can he be younger than you?" Seeing Chunbo deny that he was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage and say that the true Duke of Loyalty was even younger, the officials in the courtyard were all shocked. In fact, Chunbo wasn't lying. According to his real age, he was older than Yang Chendong by 3 years. Of course, this wasn't the main point at this time. He had already seen Yun Kei in the crowd, and immediately showed a smile and greeted from afar, "Leader Yun." Yun Kei also saw Chunbo when he and the others entered the courtyard, and he had already stood up from his chair. "Political Commissar Chun, congratulations on your promotion." Chunbo was no longer a battalion cadre, but a regimental commander with the actual position of political commissar. But for these ruthless people who were used to killing enemies on the battlefield, they seemed to like commanding the army and preferred to be with the frontline army. From this point, Chunbo preferred to be called battalion commander and not political commissar. But who was Yun Kei? He was the backbone of the security bureau, and he had heard this name from the 6th young master more than once. This was someone that the 6th young master valued highly, and he wasn't part of the military system, so he should be more polite. "Leader Yun, you must be joking. My political commissar position is just a title." "Haha, that's because political commissar Chun doesn't care about empty titles. He has noble character and unquestionable integrity." Skylark laughed. He was worried that someone would take the risk. His pistol had already fired 4 bullets. At most, he could fire 3 more shots. Although it wouldn't take long to change the magazine, who could say that there wouldn't be any accidents? But now, the mercenaries were here, and it was the strongest Lung Feng. He could finally rest assured and leave the situation here to the Lung Feng to handle. The two of them talked as if there was no one around, as if they didn't put anyone else in their eyes. However, the other Lung Feng didn't stay idle. They went forward and grabbed the ministers of the Lansong Kingdom one by one, and once they encountered the slightest resistance, they would beat them up without mercy. If these people were Han officials, perhaps the Lung Feng would be more lenient, but sorry, they didn't have such rights if they were foreigners. Several people were beaten up because they were too slow to crouch down, and the others learned from their mistakes. They cooperated well, and the situation was quickly under control. "Leader Yun, You know the situation here better, let's see how to deal with it. Okay. Yin Ke nodded without any trace of politeness. The Lung Feng was naturally good at fighting, but when it came to seeing through people's hearts and gathering intelligence, they were far inferior to the Security Bureau. For example, he had a list of names in his hands, which showed the wealth of the captured ministers. Other than Long Qi and He Guang, the other ministers were naturally not so lucky. The situation was set, they didn't work hard before, and wanted to hug the thick thighs afterwards. Sorry, it was all too late. Yin Ke had already received Yang Qindong's secret order to confiscate the wealth of the Landsong Kingdom's ministers. Of course, he wouldn't be lenient at this moment. In order to make things go smoothly, he first set his eyes on Emoda. Emoda still had some strength, at least he didn't die in the fight just now, he only suffered a knife wound. Seeing the mercenaries appear, he knew that the situation was over. He took the initiative to tuck his tail between his legs, lowered his head, and blended into the crowd. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.